Germany of Iron and Blood. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 501, Frustrated. Da da da. Bang, bang, bang. The continuous roar of the machine gun, mixed with the crisp sound of the rifle like fried beans. The entire south bank of the Marne River has been completely enveloped by the sound of guns. A total of 2 million German and British French allied forces fought the fiercest battle on a front hundreds of kilometers long. Attack. Attack. For France, go. Kill those Germans. For the glory of the British Empire, go. Fire and kill them all. Whether it is the British and French allied forces or the German army, they are all shouting frantically. The bullets enveloped the enemy like a torrential rain. The German army hiding in the fortifications is okay, and there is still a place to hide. Although their fortifications were hastily constructed overnight, they were extremely effective after the British and French artillery was completely suppressed. On the other hand, the Anglo-French coalition forces on the attacking side completely exposed their bodies. Fragmentation of the human body is fully displayed at this moment. Only one bullet is needed to take away a fresh life. Da da da. A squadron of machine guns is firing, and several magazines have been used up, but in front of the position, no less than 20 soldiers from the British and French coalition forces have fallen. But even so, the offensive of the British and French coalition forces continued. During this battle, the soldiers of the British and French allied forces showed a strong will to fight. Of course, this also has a lot to do with the propaganda of those officers. The officers declared to these ordinary soldiers that both the British Empire and the French Republic have reached the most critical moment. If the German army fails, then the British Empire and the French Republic will perish. For these soldiers, they don't want to see their country perish. All they can do is to do their best in the war and fight the German army to the death. It was under such circumstances that the Battle of the Marne River was fought so fiercely. Soldiers on both sides of the war fought desperately. Their bodies were piled up in layers on the south bank of the Marne River. Your Highness, the Anglo-French coalition forces are attacking fiercely. Although we have repelled their attacks many times and caused them great casualties, they still haven't collapsed. Major General Manstein reported to Qin Tian. Well, the next battle will be more and more tragic. Whether it is the British or the French, they don't want to lose. Therefore, if we want to defeat them, we have to work harder. Qin Tian nodded. Let the artillery and air force continue to provide fire support to the front line. Our troops are not as strong as the British and French allied forces, so we can only find a way in terms of firepower. Qin Tian ordered. Yes, Your Highness. Without sufficient mobilization, the German army has never been able to compare with the British and French allied forces in terms of strength. However, thanks to the already strong combat effectiveness of the German army, coupled with advanced weapons and equipment, it became possible to win more with less. This is why Qin Tian is full of confidence in this battle. I hope that the British and French allied forces will attack more violently. In this way, we can use powerful firepower to kill and injure their vital forces. In that case, the next battle will undoubtedly be much easier to fight. Qin Tian thought secretly in his heart. Qin Tian is undoubtedly able to wipe out the main force of the British and French allied forces in this Marne River battle. Although the total strength of the Anglo-French allied forces is more than 3 million, the real main force is not many. If their main force can be eliminated in this battle, then the German army will truly establish the victory on the Western Front. Although, as the war situation continues, the casualties of the German army are also rising. However, compared with the losses of the British and French allied forces, the losses of the German army are undoubtedly much smaller. If this continues, the first to be unable to hold on will definitely be the Anglo-French coalition forces. The fierce battle between the two sides lasted until sunset. The frontline troops of the German army were almost exhausted. However, they achieved great results. Although the British and French allied forces invested the main force in this offensive, but the German defense line is still very stable. At the same time, the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses in front of the German defense line. While the German army was celebrating that it had resisted the attack of the British and French allied forces and caused them heavy losses, the British and French allied forces were wailing, "Your Excellency Marshal, the 8th Army lost more than 50,000 people in today's battle, accounting for a quarter of the entire army. If this continues, the army will collapse soon." French Army Admiral Auguste Debay, commander of the 8th Army, said with a mournful face. General Foch, commander of the French 9th Army, also looked livid. Although he didn't cry like Admiral Auguste Debay, he was undoubtedly very distressed about the heavy loss of his troops. The 8th Army and 9th Army of the French Army are new troops formed later, not only not well equipped, but also insufficiently trained. In this attack, it served as the main force to counterattack the German army. Under the powerful firepower of the German army, they suffered extremely heavy losses. The losses of these two group armies alone amounted to almost 100,000 people today. The other French 2nd Army, 4th Army, 6th Army and the 2nd Army of the British Expeditionary Force also suffered considerable losses in today's battle. If several armies add up, they also lost 60,000 to 70,000 people. If you add yesterday's losses, the British and French allied forces lost more than 200,000 troops in this battle, which is equivalent to 1/5 of the troops they deployed on the Marne River defense line. The fighting will of the Western Army is often not as firm as that of the Eastern Army. If the loss exceeds 10%, the army can be regarded as a serious injury. If it exceeds 20%, many troops will collapse. If it hadn't been handled properly, there might have been trouble already. But even so, Marshal Zayafei had to admit that it was almost impossible to launch a counterattack and drive the German army back to the north of the Marne River. Next, I'm afraid that there is no choice but to continue to fight trench warfare with the German army, block the German army layer by layer, and use the trenches to consume the vital strength of the German army. As for launching a counterattack again, it is definitely impossible in a short time. Otherwise, once the losses soar again, the entire coalition may collapse. At that time, there will be no need to fight at all. Chapter 502, Rush. While the main force of the German army and the main force of the British and French allied forces were fighting on the south bank of the Marne River, the offensive of other German troops also began. The right-wing group composed of the German 6th Army and the 7th Army began to attack Verdun. About 400,000 people from the 3rd Army and the 5th Army of the French Army faced the Germans here. The left-wing cluster composed of the German 1st Army and the 8th Army also set off from Amiens on April 1st and attacked all the way south, aiming at Rouen on the banks of the Seine. Although, from Amiens to Rouen, the distance is more than 100 kilometers. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of British and French allied forces intercepted. However, the German 1st Army and 8th Army, with a combined total of 500,000 people, are well equipped and well trained, and they can be called the elite troops of the German army. In particular, the 8th Army, on the Eastern Front, defeated Russia by itself. With such a powerful force, it is undoubtedly very suitable for them to take on the task of rushing. In order to ensure the long-distance raid of hundreds of thousands of troops, Qin Tian prepared a large number of trucks for the German 1st Army and 8th Army before the war. These trucks can not only be used to tow cannons and transport combat supplies, but they can also be used directly to transport troops at critical moments. The wheels of a car will always be faster and require less effort than a soldier's legs. After arriving in a car, you can get out of the car and fight directly. General Ludendorff, Your Highness, they have launched a fierce battle with the British and French allied forces on the south bank of the Marne River. Although the battle was fierce, we still firmly hold the upper hand. It can be said that the main force of the British and French allied forces has been dragged down by us. Stop it. What happens next is up to us, said General Crook, commander of the German 1st Army Corps. Lieutenant General Ludendorff nodded. Compared with General Crook, Lieutenant General Ludendorff was much younger. At the same time, his rank and position are a little lower, being able to serve as the Chief of Staff of the 8th Army with the rank of Lieutenant General, and to command the 8th Army with full authority when Qin Tian is away, shows how much Qin Tian trusts him. Of course, the most important thing is that Lieutenant General Ludendorff himself is very capable. Otherwise, Qin Tian would not be able to discern the truth. So he would pass him by and let him be promoted from colonel to mid-level in a short period of time will be Once this war is over, it is not impossible for Ludendorff to be promoted again. General, we are going all the way from Amiens to Rouen. We need to defeat the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force, the 3rd Army and the 1st Army of the French Army. Although these three armies add up to only more than 600,000 people, they are more powerful than ours. Not much more. However, these troops are undoubtedly the real elite of the British and French coalition forces. Therefore, we need to be especially cautious in this battle. Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. Although, the 8th Army was capable of defeating millions of Russian troops on the Eastern Front on its own. However, the combat effectiveness of the Russian army is far worse than that of the British and French allied forces. Ludendorff did not believe that the 8th Army could still achieve such a record against the sky on the Western Front. However, Lieutenant General Ludendorff also believed that they would definitely win the final victory on the Western Front. Admiral Crook nodded. According to the plan, we can advance directly south along the road and railway, all the way to Rouen, then cross the Seine River in Rouen, attack along the Seine River, and advance to the Paris. Although the British and French forces will stop us, I believe we will be able to defeat them. Although, the most quintessential part of Paris is on the north bank of the Seine. The left-wing cluster is attacking the south bank of Paris. The reason why the left-wing group was allowed to attack the south bank of Paris was to encircle the main force of the remnants of the British and French allied forces in Paris. Qin Tian believed that when the left-wing group reached Paris, the central group also defeated the main force of the Anglo-French coalition forces on the south bank of the Marne River, and went to Paris. At that time, the two clusters will happen to be one north and one south, enclosing Paris. At that time, the main force of the remaining troops of the British and French allied forces will not be able to escape, and can only be annihilated by them. General Ludendorff, is the 8th Army ready? Admiral Crook asked. Because Admiral Crook had the highest rank and Qin Tian did not sit in the 8th Army, the commander of the left-wing cluster was General Crook. General, you are ready and ready to go at any time. Admiral Ludendorff replied. Admiral Crook looked at his watch, and then said, well, the whole army will set off in an hour. At 9 o'clock in the morning on April 1st, the left-wing cluster composed of the German 1st Army and the 8th Army split into two routes and headed south from Amiens. Deployed in the northwest of France are the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force, the 3rd Army and the 1st French Army. These three troops are all elite troops of the British and French allied forces. Not only well equipped, but also well trained. Unlike those newly formed troops, their combat effectiveness is undoubtedly stronger. The person in charge of commanding this force is Sir French, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force. Headquarters are located at Creil, north of Paris. Their mission was originally to prevent the German army from attacking Paris. You know, during last year's battle, the German 1st Army directly rushed to a place only a few tens of kilometers away from Paris, scaring the high-level French people so much that they almost fled wildly. In order to prevent such a situation from happening again, the British and French allied forces mobilized the main force to defend Paris. It's just that they guessed wrong this time. The German 1st Army and 8th Army did not attack Paris directly, but chose to bypass Rouen and then attack Paris. There is another reason for doing this, and that is to cut off shipping on the Seine. Many of the supplies and equipment of the British Expeditionary Force arrived in France from the United Kingdom. The route on the Seine River has become an important supply for the British Expeditionary Force. Once the Seine route is cut off, there will be problems with the supply of the British Expeditionary Force. At that time, the combat effectiveness will inevitably be affected. It was relatively easier for the German army to win. The two 500,000 legions of the German left-wing group launched an attack, which immediately made the top leaders of the British and French allied forces nervous. Sir French immediately ordered that the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force, the 1st Army of the French Army of the 3rd Army, and the 1st Army of the French Army be ready for battle. Once you encounter a German attack, you must resist it. At the same time, Sir French also planned to deploy reinforcement for reinforcement. The 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force, the 10th Army of the French Army staying in Paris, and the 11th and 12th Army of the French Army formed in southern France can all be transferred to the front line when necessary. Chapter 503, The Only Hope. Cray, British Expeditionary Force Command. In Sir French's office, Several generals of the British and French allied forces were frowning as they looked at the military map. The map shows that more than 500,000 people from the German 1st Army and 8th Army have already launched an offensive. There is no doubt that this is undoubtedly a great test for them. Gentlemen, the Germans have launched an offensive. Their forwards left Amiens and headed south. It is estimated that they will contact our troops tomorrow morning at the latest. Sir French said, Your Excellency, the Germans are also aggressively attacking the Marne River. Marshal Joffre is under great pressure. Obviously, the Germans are preparing to launch an all-out attack and defeat us in one fell swoop. British Expeditionary Force No. General Haig, commander of the 1st Army Group, said, That's right. For the Germans, after defeating the coalition forces, they can declare final victory. We have nothing to do with them. Admiral Benson, commander of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force, side tone. For these generals of the British Expeditionary Force, the disastrous defeat of the Royal Navy is also a pain in their hearts. Although, in the United Kingdom, the status of the Royal Navy is much higher than that of the Army, and the Royal Navy has always taken the bulk of its annual military expenditure. The Royal Navy was unlucky, and these suppressed Army generals felt a bad breath in their hearts. However, the disastrous defeat of the Royal Navy also pushed the British Empire to the brink of failure. Once the British Empire is defeated in this war, the consequences will be very serious. The entire British Empire will suddenly decline from its status as a world hegemon and become an ordinary country. This is undoubtedly something that these generals cannot accept. Therefore, the generals of these expeditionary forces hope to defeat the Germans by their own strength. In this way, they can become the savior of the British Empire. At that time, the status of the army in the UK will also be greatly improved, and it may even be dubbed the title of the Royal Army. It's just that the German army is too strong. They lost a lot of troops in last year's battle. The British and French allied forces tried their best to resist the German attack. In the past half a year, the strength of the British and French coalition forces has become stronger. But at the same time, the German army has undergone radical changes and has become stronger. This is definitely not good news for the British and French coalition forces. Your Excellency, I understand that the combat effectiveness of the German army has been greatly improved compared to half a year ago. The troops they attacked on the Marne River showed their powerful combat capabilities to the fullest. Not only are they equipped with a large number of artillery and machine guns, and the will to fight has also improved. Therefore, this battle may not be easy to fight. General Despierre, commander of the French First Army, said with some concern. Admiral Despierre's words immediately silenced the atmosphere in the office. Everyone knows that this time is undoubtedly a great test for the British and French coalition forces. If it fails, France will undoubtedly be the first to be unlucky. However, after France fell, Britain would never be able to escape. The current Britain and France are like a pair of troubled brothers. Their fates have been tied together, and if they fail, they will not end well. No matter what, for the sake of the British Empire and the French Republic, we must do our best to defeat the Germans. Otherwise, our two countries will be finished. Sir French said. Admiral Haig, Admiral Benson, and Admiral Despierre all nodded. They certainly didn't want to fight the Germans if they could. However, the outbreak of war is not decided by them. However, once the war started, they had no other choice. The only thing they can do is try their best to win this war. First of all, we need to figure out the intentions of the Germans and where their offensive focus is. This is very important. This will allow us to mobilize a powerful army to stop the Germans. Second, we need more troops. I sent a telegram to Marshal Joffre requesting that the 4th Army of the Expeditionary Force be transferred up. If possible, the 10th Army of the French Army stationed in Paris can also go to the front to fight. To keep Paris, nothing is better than defeating the Germans. There is a more efficient way, said Sir French. Your Excellency, I think the focus of the German attack should be Paris. There is nothing more important than Paris. Didn't the Germans always want to force us to withdraw from the war? He may think that taking Paris will be able to. I got what I wanted, said Admiral Despierre. Sir French nodded. Paris is indeed the best target. From the very beginning of the war, this was the target of German attacks. However, the German army failed to succeed last time. But this time, it is difficult to say whether the German army will succeed. At least, the current situation is very unfavorable to the British and French coalition forces. There are many routes to attack from Amiens to Paris. However, if the Germans want to save time, a direct attack is the best. This is what we are looking forward to. In the past 6 months, we have built a large number of routes north of Paris. Fortifications. If the Germans attack, these fortifications can come in handy, Admiral Haig said. Sir French frowned. The British and French allied forces built fortifications north of Paris, and the German army could not be clear. So, will the Germans do what they want? This is undoubtedly difficult to say. Order the frontline troops to be vigilant. Once the Germans launch an attack, report immediately, Sir French said. When it is impossible to judge the direction of the German army's attack, it can only adopt such a stupid method. Yes, Your Excellency. Several generals replied. In addition, let the main force get ready. Once the German attack direction is determined, it will be dispatched immediately. This time, we must successfully block the German attack. Wait until we have wiped out their vital forces, and then launch a counterattack to completely defeat them. They, said Sir French. Sir French also wanted to lead the British expeditionary force to defeat the German army, although the strength gap between the two sides is very large. But Sir French believed that the joint British expeditionary force and the French army had enough strength to fight the German army. With luck, defeating the Germans is not impossible. To defeat Germany and save the British Empire, they must defeat the German army on the French battlefield and win. This is their only hope of winning the war. Chapter 504, Vulnerable. The left-wing cluster composed of the German 1st Army and the 8th Army set off from Amiens and quickly approached south. The 1st Army, 3rd Army, and 1st French Army of the British Expeditionary Force immediately entered a state of combat readiness after learning the news, ready to resist the German attack. It's just that the British and French allied forces didn't know the direction of the German attack for a while, and didn't know where to focus their defense. Aumale, a small city about 20 kilometers southwest of Amiens, there are only more than 10,000 residents here. In the defense line, built by the British and French allied forces, it is considered a less important node. The defense here is the 2nd Infantry Division of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. The headquarters of the division is located in the city hall of Aumale, and the residents living in the city, except for a very small number of residents, are all soldiers from the United Kingdom. Civilians fled to the south when the war broke out. General, a telegram from the Army Group Command. A staff officer reported to Major General George Milne, commander of the 2nd Infantry Division of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Major General George Milne took a look at the telegram, and then stayed aside. The Germans have started to attack, but what does that matter to us? Although Aumale is not far from Amiens, it will not become a place for the Germans. The direction of attack. If the Germans want to attack, they will attack Paris directly. According to Major General George Milne, Aumale, where he is stationed, is undoubtedly very safe. Although, this also means that there are not many opportunities for meritorious service. But at least you can ensure your own safety. After all, the Germans are not so easy to deal with. It is undoubtedly the best thing to be able to finish the battle safely without fighting the Germans. General, do we need to step up our guard? The officer asked. That's not necessary. Let the troops do what they should do. Major General George Milne shook his head. The more than 10,000 British people under his command are quite busy during this time. Although there are not many residents in the city of Aumale, there are still many French people nearby. Those young French women, because their husbands went to the front to fight, don't mention how empty and lonely they are. His soldiers were busy comforting these French women. As the division commander, Major General George Milne couldn't bear to disturb these soldiers. Anyway, there is no war now. It is precisely because of this that the 2nd Infantry Division of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force, even though it received an order to strengthen its security, was not prepared. So much so that they had no defense at all when they were raided by the German army. On the afternoon of April 1st, the German 8th Armored Division and 34th Infantry Division arrived at Aumale. Major General Guderian, commander of the 6th Armored Division of the German Army, looked at the officer in charge of the investigation in surprise. Are you sure the British in the city are unprepared? Major General Guderian asked. Yes, General. We captured a few British soldiers. From their mouths, we learned that these British people are busy having fun and have no defense at all. The officer asked. Haha, God bless. Since these British are not prepared, they are asking for their own death. General Cavill, it seems that we can easily win this time. Major General Guderian said. Major General Cavill, commander of the 34th Infantry Division, nodded. After departing from Amiens, the 8th Armored Division and the 34th Infantry Division, as the forwards of the Legion, headed south quickly, in order to ensure that the 34th Infantry Division could keep up with the 8th Armored Division. A large number of trucks were specially prepared for them, so that all soldiers and supplies were transported by car. The same treatment, as well as the 1st Armored Division and 1st Infantry Division of the 1st Army. These 2 armored divisions and 2 infantry divisions will become the 2 fists of the entire left-wing group. The German army immediately began to prepare for the attack. The artillery of the 8th Armored Division and the 34th Infantry Division were all ready to fire. Because the British army in the city was unprepared, the artillerymen did not even build artillery positions. Fire! With the order of the artillery commander, the artillerymen of the 8th Armored Division and the 34th Infantry Division opened fire. A total of 36 150mm heavy howitzers, 72 105mm light howitzers, and 108 75mm field guns began to attack the European Union. Shells poured down on British positions outside Mela. Although there are no troops stationed on the British Army's position, it is undoubtedly very necessary to destroy their position first. In this case, even if the British Army discovers an enemy attack, they will no longer be able to use these fortifications for defense. Boom. 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 The cannons from door to door began to roar, firing shells into the British positions. Intensive explosions sounded on the British positions, and the fortifications on the British positions were destroyed one by one during the explosion. When the shelling sounded, Major General George Milne's face suddenly became disastrous. Damn, where did the shelling come from? Major General George Milne cursed. At the same time, I also had an extremely bad feeling in my heart. 2 minutes later, a panicked British officer rushed in to report. General, something is wrong. There are Germans everywhere outside the city. They are shelling our position fiercely, and it is estimated that they will launch an attack soon. The officer reported. What? The Germans are really here? Gather up your troops immediately and prepare to resist the German attack. Major General George Milne ordered. However, his troops have been completely dispersed, and now it is easier said than done to gather them together again. The shelling of the German army lasted for 20 minutes, and the shells began to extend into the city. At the same time, the tanks of the 8th Armored Division began to attack. When these black lacquered steel monsters rushed towards the city of Ommel, the British soldiers who had gathered with great difficulty suddenly collapsed. In their eyes, these invulnerable iron guys are completely devil's mounts. In less than 2 hours, the German army captured Ommel. The 2nd Infantry Division of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force stationed here was immediately defeated. Except for a very few people who were killed, most of them fled. In addition, only 2,000 or 3,000 people were captured by the German army. It took Ommel so easily, which surprised Major General Guderian. However, the fact that the British are so invulnerable is undoubtedly very beneficial to Germany. This also means that they can easily win along the way. Major General Guderian immediately ordered the troops to rest in Ommel for 1 night, replenish combat supplies and fuel, and continue to attack south early tomorrow morning. Chapter 505, The Intention of the Germans. CRE, British Expeditionary Force Command. The news that the German army captured Ommel and easily defeated the 2nd Infantry Division of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force has been confirmed, which makes these generals of the British Expeditionary Force look a little unsightly. After all, the 2nd Infantry Division can be regarded as the elite of the British Army, and it was defeated so easily. This is undoubtedly a slap in the face of the British Army. Your Excellency, the 2nd Infantry Division was completely unprepared when it was attacked by the Germans. Major General George Milne even received an order, but still did not take precautions. These are obvious dereliction of duty. I request that he send them back to the country and accept the trial of the military court. Admiral Haig said with a dark face. What happened to the 2nd Infantry Division made him, the commander of the army group, ashamed. Sir French nodded. Major General George Milne, this time he has indeed made an unforgivable mistake. However, the Germans were able to defeat the 2nd Infantry Division and take Omar in just 2 hours. It can be seen that their combat effectiveness should not be underestimated, Your Excellency. This is because the Germans dispatched a large number of infantry. On the one hand, the 2nd Infantry Division was unprepared, and on the other hand, it had no experience in dealing with German armored forces. That's why it suffered a disastrous defeat so quickly, said Admiral Benson, commander of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Your Excellency, the German armored forces are indeed very powerful. In particular, it was the German 8th Army that attacked Ommel. They were on the Eastern Front, but they defeated the Russians on their own. French Army General Despierre, commander of the 1st Army, sighed. Originally, the French had great hopes for Russia, an ally. In their view, France and Russia are Germany attacking on both sides. No matter how powerful the German army is, it will certainly not be able to withstand their attack. But I didn't expect that the Russians would be so vulnerable and easily defeated by the German army. This puts the current France in extreme danger. Anyway, since the Germans have already launched an attack, then we need to resist their attack and find a chance to defeat them. I don't want what happened to the 2nd Infantry Division to happen again. French Sir said. Yes, Your Excellency. Several army commanders replied. The Germans captured Ommel. Can we now determine the direction of their attack? Sir French asked. Your Excellency, after the Germans captured Ommel, there were 2 directions. One was to continue to attack southward, attacking Rouen, which was garrisoned by the 1st Army, and the other was to attack the 1st French Army, garrison Beauvais, and then attack Paris from here. At present, it is more likely that the Germans will attack Beauvais, Admiral Haig said. The reason why he made such a judgment is entirely because he believes that Paris is still the primary target of the German army. Attack Beauvais and defeat the French 1st Army. In that case, the German army will be very close to Paris. Sir French nodded. In this case, we have to strengthen the defense at Beauvais. General Benson, from the 3rd Army, transferred half of the troops to Beauvais to assist the French 1st Army in defense. Here, in any case, the German attack must be stopped. I will send other troops to reinforce it. If we can smash the German attack at Beauvais, then we can defeat them in one fell swoop. Yes, sir. Admiral Despierre and Admiral Benson both replied. General Haig, your 1st Army should also be ready. Once we hold off the German attack at Beauvais, the 1st Army will immediately attack the German rear, assist the frontal troops, and defeat them in one fell swoop. Sir French went on. Yes, Your Excellency. Admiral Haig nodded, and he regarded this as an opportunity to avenge his shame. According to Sir French's order, the British and French allied forces immediately acted. The French 1st Army fortified its position at Beauvais, waiting for the German attack. At the same time, the British Expeditionary Force sent 100,000 troops to reinforce Beauvais, preparing to stop the German army there. Unfortunately, Sir French and the others were wrong from the beginning. The goal of the German attack, although it is Paris. However, instead of attacking Beauvais, they planned to cross the Seine from Rouen. The German 8th Armored Division and 34th Infantry Division set off from Ommel on April 2nd and approached Rouen. Because of the disastrous defeat of the 2nd Infantry Division in Ommel, other troops of the British and French allied forces did not dare to take it lightly. As soon as the German army set off from Ommel, they were discovered by their reconnaissance troops. The German army set off from Ommel. Army started from Ommel and went all the way south. How is this possible? Sir French was shocked when he heard the news, and he couldn't believe it. Your Excellency, it seems that the Germans are not attacking Beauvais, but Rouen. We need to tell General Haig to prepare him. Admiral Benson said. Early in the morning on April 2nd, Admiral Haig left Creil and returned to Rouen to take command of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Sir French nodded, but he still couldn't figure it out. Obviously Beauvais is closer to Paris, but why did the Germans go far and away to attack Rouen? Send a message to General Haig to hold off the German attack in Rouen. General Benson, you will lead the entire Third Army and a part of the French First Army to Rouen immediately and cooperate with the First French Army. Army Group, foil the plot of the German army. This time, no matter what, the Germans must be defeated. Sir French said. Yes, sir. Admiral Benson replied. In response to the direction of the German attack, the British and French allied forces immediately changed their deployment. General Benson, commander of the British Third Army, led the entire Third Army and part of the French First Army, providing 300,000 people, to Rouen to reinforce the First Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Admiral Haig was even more nervous when he learned that Rouen had actually become the target of the German army. After he rushed back to Rouen, he immediately ordered the First Army to enter a state of emergency combat readiness. At the same time, began to shrink the line of defense. All the troops deployed on the periphery will be withdrawn to the periphery of Rouen, ready to stand here for help. After learning of the powerful attack power of the German army, General Haig didn't even have the courage to fight the German army again. After all, when fighting in the wild, they simply had no way to resist the attack of the German armored forces. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 506. Stick to it. From Ormail to Rouen, it is only more than 50 kilometers. At the advancing speed of the German army, it took only 2 days for the German 1st Armored Division, 1st Infantry Division, 8th Armored Division and 34th Infantry Division to advance to the outskirts of Rouen. However, the German army did not launch an attack immediately, but was waiting for the arrival of the main force. After all, the British have nearly 200,000 troops in Rouen. Rouen is also a big city. With only 4 divisions and tens of thousands of people, it is very difficult to capture Rouen, which is defended by 200,000 British. Even if it can be fought down, the casualties will definitely not be so small. Although the armored forces of the German army are very strong, once the enemy has counter weapons against tanks, the armored forces entering the street battle will inevitably suffer heavy losses. The true strength of the armored forces should be brought into play in field battles. That is the best battlefield to fully display the strength of the armored forces. The German 8th Army and other units of the 1st Army are also on their way to Rouen. In order to speed up the march of the troops, the German army mobilized a large number of trucks. France has convenient transportation facilities, and without interference from the enemy, troop transport is undoubtedly very fast. By April 6th, the main forces of the German 8th Army and 1st Army had arrived in Rouen. As more and more German troops gathered in Rouen, the British and French allied forces can confused already be sure that the German army's attack target is Rouen. Although this made them very, but at this point, there was no time to think about anything else. The most important thing is to resist the German attack first. The basement of the Rouen City Hall became the headquarters of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Admiral Haig has a serious face. All the information obtained from them can show that the German army is about to launch an attack on Rouen. So, can only 200,000 people withstand the attack of more than 500,000 German troops? Even though Admiral Haig had great confidence in his troops, he knew that it would be very difficult. How long will it take for the reinforcement led by General Benson to reach Rouen? Admiral Haig asked. If the 300,000 reinforcement led by Admiral Benson can arrive in time, then at least they can make up 500,000 people. Even if the combat power cannot be compared with the German army, but relying on city defense, it should still be able to withstand the German attack. If it can consume a large amount of the active force of the German army, it will create favorable conditions for the subsequent counterattack. General Benson is not far from Rouen. It is estimated that it will take up to 3 days to arrive. A general reported. The reinforcement led by Admiral Benson did not march fast. Especially when the German army did not launch an offensive in Rouen, it made him worry that he would be attacked by the German army. So, stop and go all the way, knowing that it has not arrived yet. General Haig thought for a while, and then said, send a telegram to General Benson, telling him that once Rouen is attacked by the German army, I hope he can send troops to attack the rear of the German army to reduce our pressure. Yes, General. The general nodded. Admiral Haig was obviously not only thinking about resisting the German attack in Rouen, he also hoped to defeat the German army here in one fell swoop. In that case, not only will change the current situation, but it will also be of great benefit to him personally. General Crook, commander of the German First Army, and Lieutenant General Ludendorff, Chief of Staff of the 8th Army, did not waste time. After the main force of the two legions arrived in Rouen, they immediately gave the order to attack. The German firepower preparations began at 10 AM on April 6. The two armies used 504 105mm heavy howitzers, 1008 105mm light howitzers and 1512 75mm field guns to attack the British defense lines around Rouen, and shells poured into the city. Boom, boom, boom. The shells fell like raindrops and exploded on the British defense line. Earth and rocks splashed, and gunpowder smoke filled the entire position. The shrapnel was mixed in the dust and scattered in all directions. Once a soldier was hit, he would often lose his life. Under heavy artillery fire from the German army, the fortifications of the British army outside Rouen were destroyed bit by bit. Although the artillery of the British army also launched a counterattack, the entire First Army of the British Expeditionary Force had only 180 114mm howitzers and 540 83.8mm field guns, which were far from being comparable to the German army in terms of numbers. In terms of power and performance, it is even at a disadvantage. Under the suppression of the German artillery, the British artillery suffered heavy losses, and it was impossible to stop the German artillery bombardment of Rouen. The city of Rouen was also heavily bombarded by the German army, causing the city to become ruins little by little under the German bombardment. The air teams of the German First Army and 8th Army also came to reinforce. A large number of aircraft bombed the artillery positions of the British Army, causing the loss of the artillery of the British Army to continue to soar. Damn it, the artillery fire of the Germans is too powerful. They are only 500,000 people, and they are equipped with so many cannons. Even if all the cannons of the entire expeditionary force are added up, I'm afraid there are not so many cannons. Admiral Haig, seeing my artillery being eaten up bit by bit under the pincer attack of German cannons and planes, my heart felt like it was dripping blood. General, in terms of artillery alone, the Germans are definitely number one in the world. The cannons equipped by each infantry division is simply incomparable to the armies of other countries. The German planes are also very powerful, and many of our artillerymen were killed during the strafing and bombing of their planes. General Haig nodded, feeling very helpless. He knew that in terms of firepower, the British Expeditionary Force was far from being able to compare with the German army. What's more terrible is that once the British and French allied forces are defeated in France, the German army is very likely to land in the British mainland. At that time, they will have to face the attack of such a powerful army. That would be disastrous for the UK. These damned Germans must not be allowed to land on the British mainland. Otherwise, the British Empire will be over. I don't know how many British cities will be destroyed by the Germans, and I don't know how many British people will die under the guns of the Germans. Next, Admiral Haig secretly made up his mind. If they could defeat the Germans on the French battlefield, they might be able to reverse the situation. At least, it will be impossible for the German army to land on the British mainland again. Order all ministries. Once the Germans attack, they must stick to their positions and never retreat. Admiral Haig issued an order. Chapter 507, Anti-Tank Weapons. General Ludendorff, after the firepower preparations are over, let's launch an attack. The armored troops also dispatched. However, after breaking through the British's outer defense line, the armored troops stopped moving. The infantry attacked the city of Rouen. Crew. General K said. Although, with the assistance of armored forces, street fighting will go more smoothly. However, the loss of armored forces will inevitably soar. Admiral Crook doesn't want to be wasted in urban street battles in the armored units that are treated like treasures. Lieutenant General Ludendorff nodded, fully agreeing with General Crook's point of view. Although armored units are protected by armor, their defense is undoubtedly much stronger than that of infantry. However, in the face of anti-tank weapons, tank armor may not be able to withstand it. Especially fighting in the narrow streets of the city, tanks are easily destroyed. When fighting on the Eastern Front, the Russians lacked anti-tank weapons. At most, they carried explosive packs and cluster grenades to die with the German tanks, so the 8th Armored Division participated in those street battles. However, the Western Front was different. Although the British and French Allied forces are not equipped with tanks yet, they are equipped with anti-tank weapons. Of course, the performance of those anti-tank weapons may not be as good as that of the German army. However, there should be no problem dealing with tanks equipped by the German army. Therefore, Qin Tian also specifically told the armored troops not to engage in street fighting lightly. Yes, General. Our armored forces have greater uses. Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. Admiral Crook laughed immediately. He understood what Lieutenant General Ludendorff meant. In addition to the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force in Rouen, the British and French Allied forces also have part of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force and part of the 1st Army of the French Army that are heading towards Rouen. If it is possible to wipe out the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force and at the same time severely damaged, or even wipe out part of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force and part of the 1st French Army, then the British and French Allied forces will be severely damaged. They can even change their strategy appropriately, divide the left-wing cluster into 2 parts, and advance towards Paris along the banks of the Seine. The German firepower preparations took a full 2 hours. After that, the German 1st Army and 8th Army immediately launched an attack on Rouen. For this attack, the officers and soldiers had already had lunch in advance and had a good rest, so that they could devote themselves to the attack with a more enthusiastic and energetic state of mind. The 1st Armored Division and the 8th Armored Division, with a total of more than 500 tanks, participated in this attack. These tanks, divided into multiple lines, assisted the infantry in breaking through the British lines. Crunch, crunch. The tanks' tracks were crushed on the ground, making a tooth-piercing sound. Numerous infantry followed the tanks and attacked the British positions. At this moment, the British Army's position had already become dilapidated under the heavy shelling and bombing of the German army. The British troops stationed on these positions also suffered heavy casualties. There were corpses and broken limbs all over the position. But even so, there are still many British soldiers standing firm on the ground. I have to admit that the soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force still have a very tenacious will to fight. Although they were fighting in France, they all knew that no matter where they were, as long as they defeated the Germans, they would undoubtedly defend the British Empire. Quick, the German tanks are coming. Anti-tank guns and anti-tank guns are ready. A British officer ordered loudly. Facing the attack of German tanks, he was very nervous, and his palms were covered with sweat. Yes, sir. The soldiers immediately began to prepare. On this position, the British Army deployed a total of 2 37mm anti-tank guns and 4 anti-tank guns. If you are lucky, it will undoubtedly cause considerable casualties to the German army. When the German tanks were only 500 meters away from the British defense line, the British anti-tank guns opened fire. Boom. Boom. 2 37mm anti-tank gun shells accurately hit 2 German tanks. The frontal armor of the tank, which could not resist the shells of the anti-tank guns, was torn open at once, leaving a bullet hole the size of a fist in the armor. At the same time, the resulting fragments ran wild in the small space inside the tank, easily killing the tank soldiers inside. 2 tanks were destroyed at once, which made the German armored forces very nervous, and even the formation appeared a little chaotic. Here you go. The officers of the British Army applauded loudly. In their view, as long as they can defeat the German armored forces, it is not difficult to defeat the German army. Seizing this opportunity, the British anti-tank guns continued to fire, destroying 2 German tanks again. However, their luck ended here. The armored forces of the German army, after the initial panic, have calmed down. Some tanks began to look for the position of the British anti-tank guns, and the turrets of the tank guns even rotated. Soon, a tank found the position of an anti-tank gun of the British army. Fire! The commander gave an order, and the gunner opened fire. Boom! The muzzle of the tank gun was shining with orange flames, and a shell had already flown out. In the blink of an eye, one of the British anti-tank guns was hit. Not only the anti-tank guns were blown into parts, but the anti-tank gunners were also killed. A minute later, another anti-tank gun was also destroyed. After eliminating the threat of the two anti-tank guns, the German tanks continued to advance. When they arrived 200 meters away from the British defense line, the light and heavy machine guns on the British defense line started firing. Although these machine guns do not pose any threat to tanks, however, for infantry hiding behind tanks, it was deadly. Therefore, the German tanks carried out fixed point clearing of the firepower points of these British machine guns one after another, and destroyed all these firepower points. As the German tanks got closer and closer to the British line of defense, the remaining British anti-tank guns also opened fire. When an anti-tank bullet hits a German tank, however, unfortunately, the frontal armor of the tank is very thick, so it has withstood the bullets fired by anti-tank guns. The people in the tank were all terrified. They almost thought the tank was going to be penetrated. In that case, the tank soldiers hiding in the tank will surely die. Later, when they found that the tank had not been penetrated, the tank soldiers breathed a sigh of relief, but they all felt like they had survived the catastrophe. The machine gun of the tank opened fire immediately, killing the few British soldiers who were manipulating anti-tank guns. Chapter 508, Street Fighting. The large number of anti-tank weapons equipped by the British Army caused a lot of losses to the German Army, who were out of reach. Especially those anti-tank guns posed a deadly threat to German tanks. As for those anti-tank guns, it is almost impossible to penetrate the frontal armor of German tanks. Of course, once the side armor is hit, it is still easy to penetrate. Fortunately, after the initial discomfort, the German armored forces also realized their own threat. This made them pay attention to the threat of the British anti-tank weapons during the battle. Destroy it before the British anti-tank guns can fire. In this case, it will undoubtedly be able to effectively reduce losses. With the assistance of the German armored forces, the outer defense line deployed by the British Army outside Rouen did not play much role at all, and was quickly broken through by the German Army. After taking down the outer line of defense of the British Army, the German armored forces stopped their attack and retreated to the rear to rest. The task of continuing to attack the city of Rouen was left to the infantry. When Admiral Crook and Lieutenant General Ludendorff got the lost data of the armored force, they both frowned. In this battle, the losses of the armored forces were very large. 1st Armored Division, 24 tanks were destroyed. In the 8th Armored Division, 17 tanks were also destroyed. You know, this was not damage caused by a malfunction, but was directly destroyed by the British. With the continuous improvement of technology, the reliability of tanks has been greatly improved. However, the enemy is not idle, and the vigorously developed anti-tank technology undoubtedly poses a great threat to the German armored forces. General Ludendorff, when fighting on the Eastern Front, didn't the losses of the armored forces be so great? Admiral Crook asked. Lieutenant General Ludendorff shook his head. On the Eastern Front, almost none of our tanks were destroyed by the Russian army. They were all damaged due to malfunctions and other reasons. But now, our tanks are directly destroyed by the British. It can be seen that the British and French allied forces already have weapons against our armored forces. Admiral Crook nodded. So, when our armored forces are put into use, they won't achieve the same victories as they did on the Eastern Front. Yes, General. And in the use of armored forces, you should be more cautious. Lieutenant General Ludendorff added. However, the role of the armored forces is still irreplaceable. At least, with the assistance of the armored forces, we easily broke through the outer defense line of the British Army. The next attack on the city of Rouen will be in charge of the infantry. Admiral Crook said. After seeing the power of the British anti-tank weapons, it is even more impossible for Admiral Crook to send armored troops into street fighting. Yes, General. Admiral Ludendorff nodded. Under such circumstances, he certainly would not ask the armored troops to participate in street fighting. Subsequently, General Crook and Lieutenant General Ludendorff discussed and decided to attack Rouen in two ways. Among them, the 1st Army attacked from the north, and the 8th Army attacked from the east. The two legions each dispatched 3 infantry divisions to participate in the first round of attacks. Although the 1st Army has the most troops and is well trained, it can be called the strongest army in the German army. However, the combat effectiveness of the 8th Army is not weak either. In terms of equipment, the 8th Army is the most well equipped among the various German armies. Training is also the strongest. This makes the 8th Army's strength inferior to that of the 1st Army, but its combat effectiveness is not weak at all. Especially for street fighting, the 8th Army was the earliest unit in the German army that specialized in street fighting training. Several infantry divisions of the German army entered the urban area of Raun after only one round of charge. Then, a brutal street battle started. A general-purpose machine gun of the German army was erected on a roof and kept firing at the positions held by the British army. Under the firepower of the German army, the British soldiers on the ground couldn't even lift their heads. Under the cover of machine guns, the German infantry launched an attack on the British positions. Grenade launcher, launch. A second lieutenant platoon leader ordered. Soon, the grenadiers launched an attack, and one by one howitzers entered the British position. The explosion sounded, and the British soldiers on the ground were thrown off their feet by the bombing. The snipers also occupied a favorable terrain and began to kill the British soldiers. Under the tactics of the German army, the British army defending this street suffered heavy losses and was completely suppressed. Following such an opportunity, the German soldiers immediately launched an offensive and rushed to a place less than 20 meters away from the British defense line. Grenade, throw. Following the order of the slightly officer, more than 20 grenades flew towards the British army's position. Continuous explosions sounded, and the British army on the position suffered heavy losses from the explosion of the German grenade. The rest of the troops were also dizzy. Before they could react, the German army had already broken into their position. Bang bang bang. Soldiers on both sides fought hand to hand, and the German submachine guns and pistols played a very strong role in such battles. Before the rifles in the hands of the British soldiers could fire, they were killed. This allowed the 3 infantry divisions of the German 8th Army to advance quickly after they entered the city of Raun and wipe out the remaining enemies in the city. On the other hand, the German 1st Army, although their advancing speed was very fast, but also, their casualties were not small. At least, compared with the casualties of the 8th Army, it is undoubtedly much greater. This surprised General Crook. After learning about the street fighting tactics of the 8th Army, he couldn't help but sigh that the 8th Army has really become the benchmark of the German army. All other legions need to learn from the 8th Legion. General Crook even pointed out that after the end of this war, all German armies need to be reorganized and trained based on the 8th Army as a blueprint. Only in this way can the combat effectiveness of the German army be raised to a higher level. In this case, it is undoubtedly good news for Qin Tian. This means that his influence will expand to the various regiments of the German army, which will undoubtedly be very helpful for him to further grasp military power. The German army was in the city of Raun like a broken bamboo, beating the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force in a panic and suffering heavy losses. Not only lost a large number of positions, but also the casualties of the troops were astonishing. This shocked Admiral Haig, commander of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. He is even more pessimistic about the future of the battle. Chapter 509, Aid. Raun, headquarters of the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Admiral Haig was frowning. On the first day, when the German army launched an attack on Raun, it caused great casualties to the British army. They not only lost the defense line outside Raun, but also lost a lot of area in the urban area. As for the casualties of the troops, Admiral Haig was very distressed. General, the German offensive is too fierce. The east and north of the city have lost a large area. Especially in the east of the city, we have already had 2 infantry divisions defeated by the Germans. The German vanguard is far away from the commander. The straight line distance from the front is even less than 2 kilometers. A major general reported to General Haig. This is really bad news. Could it be that we have no way to resist the German attack? Admiral Haig was very speechless. The 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force is the most powerful force in the British Army. However, in front of the Germans, it seemed vulnerable, which was a huge blow to Admiral Haig for being speechless. General, compared to last year, the combat effectiveness of the Germans has indeed been greatly improved. Especially the 8th Army, which newly appeared on the Western Front, feels that they are very good at street fighting. They performed well in street fighting. Our defenders, even with fortifications to rely on, are still being defeated by the Germans. If this continues, we may not be able to hold on for much longer. The Major General continued. Damn, isn't there any good news? Admiral Haig said angrily. General, the only good news is that our anti-tank weapons are doing pretty well. When the Germans sent tanks to attack our outer positions, we killed dozens of tanks. However, our anti-tank troops also suffered heavy losses. The 37mm anti-tank gun can destroy German tanks. However, anti-tank guns cannot penetrate the frontal armor of German tanks, but can only penetrate their side armor. If the Germans dare to fight in the street, if we invest in their tank troops, we will definitely make their tank troops suffer more casualties. Another major general said excitedly. It's a pity that the Germans didn't send out tank troops anymore. They have obviously realized the threat our anti-tank weapons pose to their tanks. But even so, we still couldn't resist the Germans in Rouen attack. Admiral Haig said. The atmosphere in the office suddenly became a little dignified. The current battle situation is undoubtedly very unfavorable to the British Army. If they are not careful, they may lose the battle. At that time, the First Army will suffer heavy losses and even be wiped out. Gentlemen, we have to find a way to resist the German offensive in Rouen. Otherwise, we may suffer an unprecedented defeat, Admiral Haig said. However, they have no other choice but to continue to defend Rouen, not to mention launching a counterattack. Once a counterattack is launched, it will undoubtedly be the German armored forces waiting for them. At that time, their troops will be directly crushed by the German armored forces with no alternative. General Haig had to send a telegram to the British Expeditionary Force Command, hoping that the Third Army of the Expeditionary Force led by General Benson and part of the 1st French Army would speed up and come to reinforce them up. And this is exactly what the German army wanted to see. The German reconnaissance planes have been paying attention to the movements of the British Third Army and the French First Army. After learning that they are speeding up to Rouen, General Crook, the commander of the German First Army, and the staff officer of the 8th Army Lieutenant General Ludendorff, all laughed. General, the British reinforcement have arrived, and it's time for us to dispatch. Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. After the German army captured Rouen, they had to cross the Seine River. In this case, their logistics supply line will be very dangerous. If the British and French allied forces can be defeated before crossing the Seine, then relatively speaking, it will be much easier. They attacked Rouen, but they did not do their best, just waiting for the British and French allied forces to come to their door. The Anglo-French coalition forces who came to the rescue amounted to more than 300,000 people. If we can eat them all, then we will win this battle. Admiral Crook's eyes shone with excitement of light. The troops deployed by the British and French allied forces in the northwest direction have only 3 group armies with more than 600,000 people. If they can eat these 300,000 people in one bite, they can eat another 200,000 people in Rouen. Then, there are only 100,000 British and French allied forces left. Even if they draw reinforcement from other places, it is no longer a concern. After all, the central and right-wing clusters of the German army are also attacking. This time, both of our armored divisions can be put into battle. There is no problem in defeating the reinforcement of the British and French coalition forces. But it is very difficult to say how much results can be achieved, Lieutenant General Ludendorff said. Of course, he also hoped that the bigger the result, the better. In order to eat as much as possible the reinforcement of the British and French allied forces, the German 1st Army and 8th Army made careful deployments. The 1st Armored Division and the 8th Armored Division will serve as the main force of the assault. In addition, the 1st Infantry Division and the 34th Infantry Division will be responsible for detours to block the retreat of the British and French allied forces. The remaining infantry divisions will go into battle one by one, trying to encircle and annihilate the 300,000 reinforcement from the British and French allied forces in the area east of Rouen. The 2 armored divisions of the German army lost dozens of tanks in Rouen, which was undoubtedly a big loss for them. But this time in the field battle, they are still the main force. Both armored divisions also believed that they could once again play a key role in this battle. British 3rd Army Commander General Benson, after receiving Sir French's order, ordered his 300,000 reinforcement to march towards Rouen at an accelerated speed. At the same time, he also dreamed of attacking the rear of the German army and defeating the German army in one fell swoop. In his view, the main force of the German army at this moment must have been used to attack Rouen, and there must not be too many troops left. As long as he leads the troops to attack, he will surely win. Unfortunately, Admiral Benson didn't know that when the German army attacked Rouen, they didn't invest many troops. They only invested 6 infantry divisions, which made the British army in the city unable to resist. The rest of the main force had their pockets wide open, waiting for the 300,000 people led by General Benson. Chapter 510. It's the Trap. Fleury, a small town more than 10 kilometers east of Rouen. The residents of the small town have been driven away. Here, it became the defense zone of the 2nd Infantry Division and the 3rd Infantry Division of the German First Army. The order they received was to rush here, to set up defenses to prevent the British and French allied forces from advancing westward. Behind their line of defense are the remaining more than 400 tanks of the German 1st Armored Division and 8th Armored Division. Once the Anglo-French forces start to attack, the 2nd Infantry Division and the 3rd Infantry Division will be responsible for blocking the Anglo-French forces. At the same time, other units of the German 1st Army and 8th Army will immediately start to move, forming an encirclement circle north and east of Fleury. To the south, the Seine is just a few kilometers away. If the British and French allied forces can swim across the Seine, they will break out in this direction. At noon on April 7th, the vanguard of the British and French forces, the 22nd Infantry Division of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force, arrived in Fleury. After the British army discovered that this place had been captured by the German army, it immediately stopped advancing, and at the same time, reported the situation to the Group Army headquarters, requesting further instructions. After learning of this situation, General Benson, the commander of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force, immediately ordered the 22nd Infantry Division to launch an attack. At the same time, he ordered other troops to speed up and rush for reinforcement so as to defeat the German army in the shortest possible time. Took Fleury and opened the passage to Rouen. The reason why Admiral Benson issued such an order was that he believed that the German attack on Rouen had undoubtedly reached a critical moment. Therefore, the German army sent a small number of troops to stop them and bought time to defeat the British First Army and take Rouen. In this case, they will not be able to waste time even more. After receiving the order from Admiral Benson, the British 22nd Infantry Division immediately launched an attack on Fleury. It's just that they soon knew that they had completely kicked on an iron board. The German army deployed not a small amount of troops in the small town of Fleury. Whether it is military strength or combat effectiveness, they are much stronger than their infantry division. Fire. The British army set up 18 114mm howitzers and 54 83.8mm field guns and began to fire on the German defense line outside the town of Fleury. However, 2 minutes later, they were hit back by heavy German artillery fire. The German 2nd Infantry Division and 3rd Infantry Division have a total of 36 150mm howitzers, 72 105mm howitzers, and 108 75mm field guns. The total number of artillery is 3 times that of the British Army, not to mention that the caliber of the artillery still has a great advantage. Boom. 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 When shells kept falling from the sky and hit the artillery positions of the British Army, and after their artillery was misfired, the commander of the 22nd Infantry Division of the British Army was stunned. General, judging from the scale of artillery deployed by the Germans here, they must have a large number of troops. I'm afraid we are not their opponents, said the commander of the artillery brigade. The commander of the 22nd Infantry Division of the British Army was also bitter in his mouth. How could he not know that he had kicked the iron plate this time? However, Admiral Benson's order had already been issued, and he had no choice but to bite the bullet and launch an attack. Command the troops, prepare to launch an attack. Also, send a message to the headquarters that we need reinforcement. Subsequently, the 22nd Infantry Division of the British Army launched an offensive. However, in the face of the powerful firepower of the German army, they did not take advantage of it at all. Instead, they left a lot of corpses and had to retreat in embarrassment. In the afternoon, the British 23rd Infantry Division and 24th Infantry Division rushed to the battlefield. The arrival of the new force of the two infantry divisions gave the British Army the confidence to attack. However, the British Army launched 3 consecutive attacks, but they still failed to break through the German defense line, and instead caused heavy casualties. As a last resort, the British Army had to stop the attack. At the same time, report the situation here to Admiral Benson. In the evening, Admiral Benson's 3rd Army headquarters also arrived in flurry, and the main force of the 300,000 British and French allied forces he led was basically concentrated in this area. Admiral Benson was very dissatisfied with the fact that the 3 infantry divisions had failed to break through the German defenses when they launched an attack. He directly issued a death order, asking them to continue the attack tomorrow morning, and before sunset tomorrow, they must break through the German defense line and reach Rouen. General Benson didn't know that the troops of the German 1st Army and 8th Army were in action at this moment. A large number of troops, starting from Rouen, rushed to the north and east of the main force of the British Army. Farther to the east, the 1st Infantry Division and the 34th Infantry Division were transported by truck. General Ludendorff had the various departments of the 8th Army arrived at the scheduled location? Admiral Crook asked. General, the 7 infantry divisions and 1 armored division of the 8th Army have arrived at their predetermined positions and are ready to attack at any time. Lieutenant General Ludendorff replied. Admiral Crook nodded. In addition to leaving 2 infantry divisions as reserves in the 1st Army, the remaining 13 infantry divisions and 1 armored division have also arrived at their scheduled positions. Tomorrow morning, the armored division launched the attack first, and after defeating the British and French allied forces, the other troops advanced steadily and wiped out the 300,000 British and French allied forces here. Yes, General. Lieutenant General Ludendorff nodded. Of course he would not have any opinions on this. This time, in order to encircle and wipe out the 300,000 main forces of the British and French allied forces, the 1st Army and the 8th Army have invested in the main force. On the contrary, there are not many troops used to attack Rouen. Even with the addition of the 2 infantry divisions as the reserve, there are only 8 infantry divisions in total, more than 100,000 people. On the morning of April 8th, the British 22nd Infantry Division, 23rd Infantry Division and 24th Infantry Division started busy early in the morning, preparing for the attack. Admiral Benson strictly ordered them to break through the German defenses before sunset today, and there was nothing they could do. Although he knew that the German army was difficult to deal with, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and launch an attack. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the 3 infantry divisions of the British Army completed the preparations before the attack and were ready to attack. However, they then had to stop their attack because the German army launched an attack one step ahead of them. The German 1st Armored Division and 8th Armored Division, more than 400 tanks, rushed out of the position and rushed towards the British position. The torrent of steel composed of more than 400 tanks made people unable to think of stopping it at all. My God. The German armor is here. Damn it, this is a trap. This is a trap set by the Germans. Admiral Benson was even more shocked and angry when he learned about it. Chapter 511. Dashing. Boom. The engine roar of more than 400 tanks gathered together, as if it was thunder. Countless British soldiers watched in horror as the dark tanks rushed towards them. Some timid people even asterisk their pants in fright. Oh. My God. The Germans have so many tanks, how can we resist their attack? A British soldier shouted in horror. If it wasn't for an officer right behind him, he would probably give up immediately, just run. Although this seems to be a cowardly act, at this time, saving one's own life is undoubtedly the most important thing. Anti-tank guns. Quickly set up the anti-tank guns. A British officer shouted loudly. Because the British Army was preparing to launch an attack just now, they did not build a defensive position at all, let alone erected defensive weapons such as anti-tank guns. Now, facing the attack of the German tanks, they suddenly panicked. Some British soldiers went to move anti-tank guns, but more British soldiers kept retreating. Obviously, it is too late to deploy anti-tank artillery positions at this time. Especially with so many tanks dispatched by the German army, how many anti-tank guns are needed to fight against them? I'm afraid that their anti-tank guns were overwhelmed by the torrent of German tanks before they could fire a few shots. There is no way to fight this battle. Boom. An anti-tank gun on the British position opened fire, but unfortunately, due to tension, the fired shell failed to hit the German tank. Quick, reload. Boom. A German tank opened fire, and a shell exploded next to the anti-tank gun. Although it failed to destroy the anti-tank gun, it killed all the gunners operating the anti-tank gun. The tragic death of those gunners made the scalps of other British soldiers numb. They didn't care about fighting back anymore, and ran away directly. The 22nd Infantry Division, 23rd Infantry Division and 24th Infantry Division of the British Army can be described as collapsing at the touch of a button. They were about to launch an attack, but under the attack of the German tank troops, they suffered heavy losses and were directly defeated. A large number of defeated soldiers fled to the rear. The German armored forces, with the cooperation of the two infantry divisions, advanced all the way east. General, the German tanks are so powerful that we can't resist them at all. Please retreat immediately. A major general suggested to Admiral Benson. Bastard, retreat? How can we retreat? We are here to reinforce General Haig. If we retreat, what will General Haig do? At that time, the First Army will be eaten by the Germans. Admiral Benson said angrily growled. General, we don't care so much now. Otherwise, even we ourselves will be eaten by the Germans. How can we rescue General Haig and the others then? The Major General said. Admiral Benson was taken aback for a moment. This sentence undoubtedly made sense. If even they were wiped out by the Germans, then General Haig's First Army would naturally be doomed. Order the follow-up troops to prepare to resist the German attack. Set up all anti-tank guns and destroy the German tanks. Admiral Benson ordered. In addition, the infantry divisions that ordered the French will also come up immediately. Don't dawdle. If we are eaten by the Germans, they will also have a dead end. Admiral Benson gritted his teeth said. Yes, General. Admiral Benson's order was issued, and the British and French allied forces attempted to build a line of defense to resist the German attack. To this end, they even assembled a large number of anti-tank guns. However, it is a pity that this hastily built line of defense was patronized by the German Air Force before it was attacked by the German armored forces. Hundreds of fighter jets, covering hundreds of bombers, launched an intensive bombing of the line of defense of the British and French allied forces. A large number of anti-tank guns were destroyed by German airstrikes, and a large number of gunners were also killed. As soon as the German airstrikes ended, the armored forces launched an offensive. The anti-tank artillery units of the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses, although they destroyed some German tanks. However, the number is not large, let alone stop the German attack. This line of defense was easily torn apart by the German armored forces. This battle directly caused the fighting will of the British and French allied forces to collapse. A large number of soldiers of the British and French allied forces fled in embarrassment. General Benson saw that the general situation was over, so he had to issue an order to retreat, trying to break away from contact with the German army first, reorganize his armaments, and then launch a counterattack. However, those retreating troops quickly brought Admiral Benson a bad news that couldn't be worse. General, we have fallen into the encirclement of the Germans. Our east and north are full of German troops. Now, they are advancing towards us, and we cannot escape. The general reported. What? Why are there so many Germans? Isn't their main force attacking Rouen? How did they appear here? Admiral Benson's face suddenly changed drastically. Obviously, he guessed that all this was a trap set by the German army. The German army launched an attack on Rouen, just to lure them to the door. Now, they were really fooled, and fell into the trap of the Germans. What waited for them was undoubtedly surrounded by the Germans. Organized troops to break through immediately. If you want to survive, you must break through. Otherwise, as the German oppression is getting closer, we will eventually be eaten by them. Admiral Benson ordered. However, it is too late for Admiral Benson to issue such an order now. In order to get rid of them, the German army dispatched a full 20 infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions, and also received strong support from the Air Force. Under such circumstances, if the British and French allied forces are still allowed to escape, then General Crook and Lieutenant General Ludendorff should commit suicide directly. With the steady advance of the German army, several breakouts by the British and French allied forces ended in failure. It was also under such circumstances that the British and French allied forces discovered that there was no German defense in the south. So, a large number of soldiers of the British and French coalition forces withdrew to the south, trying to escape across the Seine River. However, the bridge over the Seine River had already been blown up by the German Air Force. Many ships along the coast were also bombed. If the British and French allied forces wanted to escape from the encirclement, they had to swim across the Seine River by themselves. Countless soldiers of the British and French allied forces jumped into the Seine one after another. However, except for a very small number of people with good water skills, the rest of the people were drowned alive in it. Chapter 512. Run away. General, let's go. If we don't leave, it will be too late. Admiral Benson's guard captain said to him. Now, they have fled to the Seine. As long as you swim across the Seine, you can escape. A large number of soldiers of the British and French coalition forces are jumping into the Seine at this moment and swimming to the south bank of the Seine. When the German army was oppressing from three directions, east, west, and north, fleeing south had become the only option. As for the breakout, after countless failed attempts, leaving only a pile of corpses, no one had the extravagant hope of breaking through the encirclement of the German army and escaped. However, the Seine River is not a small river. It is the second largest river in France after the Loire River. This section of the river is even hundreds of meters wide. Now it is the flood season of the river, and the river is rushing. It is almost impossible for people with poor water skills to swim across the Seine to escape. Not to mention, there are still many people who don't know water at all. It is absolutely impossible for them to swim across the Seine. Even though many people hold templates, branches, etc., and want to use the buoyancy of these things to cross the river, there are still very few successful ones. On the contrary, it is not known how many people drowned in the Seine. Their bodies float all the way down the river, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Admiral Benson, commander of the 3rd Army of the British Expeditionary Force, looked at the wide Seine River and couldn't help but feel a burst of panic. I can't swim," Admiral Benson said. All members of the guards were stunned. Admiral Benson can't swim. In this case, it will undoubtedly be very difficult to send him safely to the south bank of the Seine River. The captain of the guard gritted his teeth and then said, "General, don't worry, we will safely send you to the south bank of the Seine. After all, Admiral Benson is the commander of the group army, and they are Admiral Benson's guards. If they abandoned Admiral Benson and escaped by themselves, the consequences would undoubtedly be very serious. If they fail, they will be sent directly to a military court for trial. The British Army will never allow this to happen." The guards found a door panel and let Admiral Benson lie on it. A few members of the guard with good water skills, holding on to the door panel, swam to the south bank of the Seine. I have to admit that Admiral Benson's luck is relatively good. Under the asterisk of several guards, he escaped alive to the south bank of the Seine despite numerous adventures along the way. But most of the Anglo-French coalition forces did not have such good luck. The coalition soldiers who successfully swam across the Seine and fled to the other side of the river were only a handful. Most of the coalition soldiers were directly drowned in the Seine. Those who arrived later saw the corpses of coalition soldiers floating on the Seine River, and their faces turned pale with fright. After the German army chased them, they surrendered directly to the German army. The encirclement and annihilation of the German 1st Army and 8th Army against the British Expeditionary Force 3rd Army and part of the French 1st Army was a complete success. The British and French allied forces had a total of more than 300,000 people. Except for a very few who escaped, the rest were either killed or drowned, and the rest surrendered to the German army. The number of prisoners of war captured alone exceeded 200,000. In this battle, the 1st Army and the 8th Army directly solved half of the total troops deployed by the British and French coalition forces in the northwest of France. In addition, the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force, which is lingering in Rouen, if they are also eaten, then the Anglo-French coalition forces will not have many troops left. The Germans will win this battle. Rouen, British Expeditionary Force 1st Army Command. Admiral Haig is still waiting for reinforcement led by Admiral Benson. Although the German army only sent 6 infantry divisions into the city of Rouen to fight street battles with the First Army of the British Expeditionary Force, but relying on powerful firepower and advanced street fighting tactics, the British army retreated steadily and suffered heavy losses. Even though the British army is still struggling to support it, it seems that it is only a matter of time before the German army wins the final victory. How long will it take for the reinforcement led by General Benson to arrive? Continue to contact them, Admiral Haig ordered. Yes, General. The adjutant immediately went down to convey the order. However, a few minutes later, the adjutant returned with a pale face. General Benson called. They were besieged by the main force of the German army. The German army dispatched hundreds of tanks to attack them, and their defense line has been breached. Now, the whole army is retreating. The adjutant reported. What? How did this happen? Isn't the main force of the Germans attacking Rouen? How could they attack General Benson? Admiral Haig obviously couldn't believe this. However, Admiral Haig then thought that General Benson would never deceive him on this matter. Well, this also means that the attack on Rouen was not the main force of the German army at all. Thinking of this, Admiral Haig almost despaired. They reorganized a group army, and they couldn't even defeat several divisions of the German army. While suppressing them, the German army was able to send the main force to besiege the 300,000 reinforcement led by Admiral Benson, and defeated them. This undoubtedly shows that the combat effectiveness of the German army is stronger than they expected. General, what should we do now? General Benson and the others have fallen into the siege of the Germans, and they are probably in danger. A major general asked. General, if we stick to Rouen, it will be very dangerous. Once General Benson and the others are defeated, the main force of the Germans will attack Rouen. At that time, we will not be able to resist at all. Another lieutenant general suggested. Obviously, everyone is very pessimistic about this battle. If the First Army of the British Expeditionary Force continues to persevere, then the final result is very likely to be completely wiped out by the German army here. Therefore, under such circumstances, everyone undoubtedly has other thoughts. General Haig also hesitated. At this time, a new telegram came. Admiral Benson sent a telegram to Admiral Haig, informing him that the Third Army of the Expeditionary Force had completely collapsed, and asked Admiral Haig to make his own plans. This telegram made Admiral Haig make up his mind. Order the ministries to stay at night. After dark, we will evacuate Rouen immediately. Along the Seine, evacuate westward. Admiral Haig ordered. He knew very well that the British and French allied forces would undoubtedly be defeated in this battle. If they withdrew to Paris, there would be no way of survival at all. Only by escaping from the main battlefield could they continue to survive. After nightfall, the remnant of the First Army of the British Expeditionary Force, led by Admiral Haig, withdrew from Rouen. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 513. Bad News. Cray, British Expeditionary Force Command. At the current headquarters, the atmosphere has become very tense. The First Army of the British Expeditionary Force was stormed by the Germans in Rouen, and suffered heavy losses. The Third Army of the Expeditionary Army and the First Group Army of the French Army took a step forward, and fell into the siege of the German Army again, which was at stake. It can be said that the current situation is already quite unfavorable for the British Expeditionary Force. If you are not careful, the entire Expeditionary Force will be severely damaged. What to do? What to do now? The First Army can't hold out in Rouen. The Third Army and part of the French Army have fallen into the trap of the Germans again. If they are eliminated, then this battle, how can we continue the fight? Sir French, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, was so anxious that he almost tore off his hair. However, this is of no use to alleviate the current crisis. Your Excellency, we need to immediately mobilize troops to reinforce General Benson, otherwise, they will be wiped out by the Germans. Once they are wiped out, it will be difficult for us to reverse the situation. German, the commander of the 1st French Army Admiral Sperry suggested. After all, his first army sent half of its troops to operate with the Third Army of the British Expeditionary Force, and they have now fallen into the encirclement of the Germans. Reinforce General Benson? Where do we have extra troops to reinforce them? Your first army has 100,000 people left, unless you draw troops from Paris. Moreover, if you draw troops from Paris, I'm afraid it will be too late. Too late, said Sir French. Although, the British and French allied forces still have two armies in Paris. However, it will take time to mobilize troops from Paris to reinforce Admiral Benson. Whether Admiral Benson can persist until the arrival of reinforcement is undoubtedly difficult to say. What's more, the British and French allied forces are also fighting very badly on the Eastern Front. If the two armies stationed in Paris are transferred away, what will happen to the city defense of Paris? Your Excellency, then we can't do nothing and just watch 300,000 troops being surrounded and annihilated by the Germans? Admiral Despair asked. Obviously, this time they are about to suffer a disastrous defeat. This is undoubtedly difficult for the British and French allied forces. General, I will send a telegram to Admiral Benson, asking him to lead his troops to insist. In addition, I will send a telegram to your government, asking them to agree to dispatch the 4th Army of the Expeditionary Force and the 10th Army of the French Army to reinforce our troops, said Sir French. As Admiral Despair said, it was impossible for them to watch Admiral Benson and 300,000 British and French soldiers being eaten by the Germans like this. Even if they knew it well, it would be difficult to arrive in time, even if they were to deploy troops now. However, they also have to try their best to fight for it. Once the 300,000 troops led by Admiral Benson are wiped out by the German army, it will be a heavy blow to the British and French allied forces. It can even be concluded from this that the British and French allied forces have no chance of winning in this battle. Yes, sir. Admiral Despair nodded. However, before Sir French could send the telegram to Paris, another telegram from Admiral Benson came. He reported to Sir French that they were attacked fiercely by the German army, especially the German armored forces, who assembled hundreds of tanks to storm their defense line. Now, their line of defense has been breached, and the entire line of defense has collapsed. This news made Sir French and Admiral Despair look ashamed. They all knew that in this case, sending troops to rescue Admiral Benson and the others was already a joke, and had no meaning. Even if reinforcements are sent to reinforce, it is very likely that the Germans will seize the opportunity and wipe them out in one fell swoop. In that case, they will pay a higher price. The fate of the 300,000 troops is almost certain, except for a small number of people who were killed, and a very small number of people who escaped back. The rest of the people would probably be captured by the Germans. For those soldiers who surrendered, Sir French and Admiral Despair will definitely not have any surprises. After all, in this battle, the fighting will of the British and French allied forces was not very strong. It is very normal to surrender to the Germans under desperate circumstances. Sir French and Admiral Despair will not blame them. After all, those soldiers have tried their best. Your Excellency, what should we do now? Admiral Despair panicked. After all, he was the general of the French army. If this battle is lost, then France will lose. This will undoubtedly be a devastating blow to France. What else can we do? Find a way to defend Paris. The Germans will probably launch an attack on Paris soon. The only thing we can do now is to shrink our troops and prepare to fight the Germans in Paris. Sir French sighed. Take a breath. Based on his experience, of course it can be seen that the current Anglo-French coalition forces have reached the end of their strength. If you want to win this battle, you can only hope for a miracle. Of course, it is almost impossible for a miracle to occur. Admiral Despair nodded, sticking to Paris. This is the only way. Of course, didn't he think they could hold Paris? When the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses, what did they use to fight the strong Germans? Your Excellency, where is General Haig? Admiral Despair asked. After all, Admiral Haig's first expeditionary army still had hundreds of thousands of people. Moreover, they can be regarded as the most powerful army of the expeditionary force. Sir French shook his head. Admiral Haig's situation is probably very bad. They have been suppressed by the Germans. Once the Germans eliminate General Benson, they will definitely attack Rouen. Attacking General Haig and the others may not be able to resist at all. Admiral Despair fell silent immediately. Sure enough, an hour later, the British Expeditionary Force Command received a telegram from Admiral Haig requesting a retreat. Although Admiral Despair was somewhat dissatisfied with Admiral Haig leading the First Army of the Expeditionary Force to retreat westward, Sir French still approved Admiral Haig's plan. After all, Admiral French was the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, and he had to look out for the interests of the United Kingdom. If Admiral Haig leads his troops to retreat westward, at least he can withdraw to the British mainland when the situation is unfavorable. These troops with actual combat experience will become the main force to protect the British mainland. Chapter 514, Ziafa's Helplessness. On the front line of the Marne, the fierce battle is still going on. The main forces of the German 2nd Army, 3rd Army, and 4th Army have crossed the Marne River and launched an attack on the deep positions of the British and French allied, although the resistance of the British and French allied forces was very tenacious. However, they were heavily shelled and bombed by warplanes from the German army, which caused heavy losses to the British and French allied forces. Under the attack of the German army, several lines of defense were lost one after another. Now, the main forces of the British and French allied forces are concentrated in the cities of Chalons, Champagne, Epernay and Chateau Thierry to resist the German invasion. The rest of the troops retreated to the rear. Facing the fierce attack of the German army, the British and French allied forces were almost unable to hold on. Champagne-Chalons, a large city on the Marne River, is in the midst of a fierce attack by the German army. German 2nd Army, supported by a large number of artillery and air firepower, was about to destroy the city into ruins. The French 2nd Army has been disabled. Now, they can only rely on the ruins in the city to resist. However, as the German attack became more and more fierce, it was a matter of time before they were completely driven out of Champagne. The German 3rd Army and 4th Army's offensive at Epernay and Fort Thierry also went smoothly. The French 4th Army and the British Expeditionary Force 2nd Army also suffered heavy losses. Even the 8th and 9th Armies of the French Army, which entered the battlefield later, also suffered heavy losses. By April 8th, the two sides had been fighting fiercely on the Marne River defense line for a week. In this week, the losses of the British and French coalition forces have exceeded 500,000 people. If it wasn't for Marshal Ziafe who took the command personally, the army might collapse. Of course, although the German army has achieved great results, the losses they paid are also not small. As the main force, the 2nd Army, the 3rd Army and the 4th Army all suffered losses to varying degrees. The total number of troops lost is almost 100,000. However, compared with the losses of the British and French allied forces, the losses of the German army were much smaller. Therefore, the officers and soldiers of the German army still maintain a high morale. Unlike the Anglo-French coalition forces, which are about to collapse. What's more, the German 5th Army, which is a reserve force, has not yet entered the battle. Once these 200,000 people also join the battle, it will undoubtedly completely change the situation of the battle. The reason why Qin Tian didn't put the reserve team into the battle immediately was because he was waiting for a more suitable time. The headquarters of the British and French coalition forces, Marshal Joffre was in the office, frowning. The losses of the British and French allied forces were so great that they could hardly hold on in the middle of the battle. Damn it, why are the Germans' attack power so powerful? If this continues, we won't be able to hold on for long. Looking at the tens of thousands of casualties every day, Marshal Joffre seemed to be dripping in his heart like blood. These are the young lads of France, the future of France. However, they lost their lives in this **** war. Originally, before the battle began, Marshal Joffre was optimistic that they could resist the German attack on the Marne River defense line. If you are lucky, you can even hit the German army hard in one fell swoop, thus launching a counterattack. However, after the battle started, the German army used powerful firepower to slap the British and French allied forces severely, making them dizzy. Coupled with the powerful attack of the German army, the British and French allied forces were even more exhausted. It can be said that, even if they are struggling to support now, they can't last long. Your Excellency, the Marshal, the 2nd Army has lost a lot. If they don't give them reinforcement, I'm afraid they won't be able to hold on. Once Champagne and Chalons are breached by the Germans, the entire Marne River defense line will collapse immediately. French 9th Army Commander General Foch said with a serious face. Marshal Joffre nodded. I know, but do we still have extra troops? The 2nd Army, the 4th Army and the 1st Army of the British Expeditionary Force are being attacked by the Germans. The 6th Army, the 1st Army, the 8th Army and the 9th Army suffered heavy losses in the counterattack against the Germans. Now it is even more important to defend important nodes on the defense line, to prevent the Germans from continuing to tear our defense line. So far, we have lost more than 5 troops. 100,000. It can be said that compared with the Germans, we no longer have any advantage in military strength. Moreover, we have been far surpassed by the Germans in terms of weaponry and morale. This will make us in this battle, we are in an even more unfavorable position. General Foch nodded. Indeed, these are the problems they face. But, you can't just do nothing because of this, right? In that case, it will only make them fail faster. Your Excellency, Marshal, we may be able to draw troops from other places. Isn't there an army of the British Expeditionary Force and an army of the French army in Paris? If we bring them here, then we can once again stabilize the front. Even, there will be enough troops to counterattack. Admiral Foch said. Marshal Joffre shook his head. The troops in Paris cannot be mobilized. Otherwise, the defense of Paris will be empty. Marshal, we are in the northwest of Paris. Don't we still have 3 army groups? With them here, Paris should be very safe. Admiral Foch said. This is a telegram from Sir French. The German 1st Army and 8th Army have also launched an attack. The 1st Army of the Expeditionary Force was oppressed in round by the Germans. Sir French has sent the 1st Army of the Expeditionary Force, the 3rd Army and part of the French 1st Army rushed to reinforce. However, I estimate that the situation is still not optimistic. Once Sir French and the others fail, this will make Paris directly threatened by the Germans. Therefore, we are here at that time. The army could not be transferred from Paris, and it must be taken just in case. Marshal Joffre said. Although, before the war, the British and French coalition forces already had more than 3 million troops. But Marshal Zafari still feels that there are too few troops, not enough at all. Although their strength is much higher than that of the German army. But unfortunately, with the same strength, they could not fight against the German army at all, and could only gather more troops to fight against the German army. When the troops suffered heavy losses, they could not be replenished in time, which made their troops less and less enough. Marshal Zafari is powerless to deal with the current complicated situation, even if he tried his best. Chapter 515, Total Attack. On the evening of April 9th, Reims, the German Western Front Command. As the battle on the front line gradually stabilized, the German army was breaking through the defense line of the British and French allied forces in an orderly manner. There was no need for Qin Tian to stay on the front line. It was best to return to the headquarters to get an overview of the overall situation. That night, the commanders of several legions rushed to the headquarters. Everyone, is the progress on the front line going smoothly? Qin Tian looked at several army commanders. Your Highness, it will take up to 3 days for the 2nd Army to take Champagne and Chalon, said General Below, the commander of the 2nd Army. Qin Tian nodded and looked at Admiral Hausen and the Duke of Württemberg. The two also immediately stated that the progress of the 3rd Army and the 4th Army was also very smooth, and it was only a matter of time before they defeated their face-to-face enemy and captured their intended target. Qin Tian is still very satisfied with the progress of the current battle situation, although the troops suffered a lot of casualties. But where is the end in war? What's more, this time the opponent is still a world-class power. It is already very rare to be able to obtain the current battle damage. Your Highness, when will our 5th Army go to the battlefield? General Demlin, the commander of the 5th Army, couldn't sit still. Seeing the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Legions fighting against the British and French allied forces on the front line, they can only watch the show behind. This is undoubtedly a torment for Admiral Demlin, who wants to make contributions. General Demlin, the 5th Army is about to enter the battlefield, Qin Tian said with a smile. Not only General Demlin was very excited, but General Below and others were also very excited. After all, according to the plan, if it were not for the crisis on the front line, there would be only one reason for the Fifth Army to participate in the battle, and that was that they were preparing to launch a general offensive and defeat the British and French allied forces in one fell swoop. However, judging from the current situation, it is indeed time to launch a general offensive. In the past week, the British and French coalition forces have been severely damaged, losing at least hundreds of thousands. Although the German army lost a lot, the main force did not suffer much loss. In particular, the armored units have not participated in large-scale battles. At most, they sent some tanks to assist in the battle when attacking the positions of the British and French allied forces. These tanks are all kept so that they can break through the defense lines of the British and French allied forces in one fell swoop during the general offensive. Your Highness, is it time for our general attack? Admiral Below asked. Yes. Now the troops of the British and French coalition forces on the Marne River defense line have been severely damaged by us. In addition, the left-wing cluster has made breakthrough progress. The 1st Army and the 8th Army surrounded and wiped out 30 soldiers on the Seine River. 10,000 British and French allied forces. At the same time, at least 100,000 British and French allied forces were wiped out in Rouen. Rouen has been controlled by the left-wing group. Now, the 1st Army is crossing the river. For this reason, we have revised the battle plan, and the 1st Army has crossed the river, the Seine River, south of the Seine River, the 8th Army on the north side of the Seine River, and the 2 armies advanced along the Seine River towards Paris. Under such circumstances, it is naturally impossible for the British and French allied forces to mobilize troops to the Marne River defense line. Therefore, again there is no point in dragging it down. It would be better to completely defeat the troops deployed by the British and French allied forces on the Marne River and cooperate with the left-wing group to besiege Paris, Qin Tian said. Qin Tian's words made these commanders excited. Paris is the capital of France. They are all optimistic that as long as Paris can be won, the battle will be over. The French, who even lost their capital, naturally have no possibility of continuing to fight. In this case, Germany is undoubtedly one step closer to winning the final victory of this war. The 1st Army and the 8th Army have done a good job. Their strength is so much smaller than ours, but they have already eliminated 400,000 British and French allied forces, which is no less than ours. Admiral Housen sighed. Yes. Then we have to hurry up. Otherwise, the left-wing cluster has advanced to Paris, but we are still on the Marne River. The Duke of Württemberg also said. After learning about the progress of the left-wing cluster, everyone felt a sense of urgency. It is an honor for everyone to be able to come to Paris. Since this is the case, then prepare to launch a total attack. Tomorrow, the 5th Army will rush to the front line. At the same time, all armored units are also ready to attack. The day after tomorrow, that is, April 11th, a general attack will be launched across the board, tearing apart the British and French forces in one fell swoop. At the last line of defense on the Marne River, completely defeat them. Qin Tian ordered. Yes, Your Highness. Several legion commanders replied. In addition, send a telegram to the 6th Army and the 7th Army, and their attack on Verdun also needs to be accelerated. Qin Tian said. The German 6th Army and 7th Army, with a total of 400,000 people, attacked Verdun, which was garrisoned by the French 3rd Army and 5th Army. However, despite the strong firepower of the German army, it caused great losses to the French army. However, relying on the solid defenses of Verdun, the French army withstood the German attack. However, with the outcome of the Battle of the Marne River, the Battle of Verdun will definitely have an immediate result. Once the German army defeated the main force of the British and French coalition forces in Verdun, if the 2 French armies defended Verdun, then their retreat would be cut off, and they would fall into the encirclement battle of the German army. Therefore, the next general offensive of the German army on the south bank of the Verdun River is undoubtedly very important. It is related to the victory or defeat of the German army in this war. If the German army defeated the British and French allied forces deployed on the south bank of the Marne River in one fell swoop, they would be able to march directly to Paris, and together with the 2 legions of the left-wing cluster, they would besiege Paris. It is almost impossible for the British and French allied forces who suffered heavy losses to hold Paris. Once Paris is taken by the German army, even France will persist. However, with heavy losses, how long can they hold on? You can guess without thinking. This battle will probably end soon. On April 10th, all members of the German Fifth Army began to cross the Marne River. With the help of the pontoon bridges built by engineers on the Marne River, all the personnel, equipment, and supplies of the Fifth Army crossed the Marne River and reached the south bank of the Marne River within a day. According to the order issued by Qin Tian, the German 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Legions are also ready to launch a general offensive. The troops attacking the three cities stationed by the British and French Allied forces continued to maintain their offensive, while the rest of the troops assembled and prepared to directly attack the remaining positions of the British and French Allied forces. On the morning of April 11th, thousands of cannons of the German army once again began to bombard the last two lines of defense of the British and French Allied forces. Chapter 516, Fiasco. The headquarters of the British and French coalition forces located in the south of the Marne River is in a gloomy state. The news that the British Expeditionary Forces 1st Army, 3rd Army and French 1st Army suffered heavy losses under the attack of the German 1st Army and 8th Army has been informed to them. After Marshal Zafari received such a telegram, he remained silent for a long time. Obviously, even he himself did not expect that the British and French Allied forces would lose so badly. Your Excellency, Marshal, now that we are in Paris, only the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force and the 10th Army of the French Army are left. The two armies have a total of only 400,000 people. Even if you add the 100,000 people of the 1st Army, the strength is only comparable to that of the Germans. Moreover, the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force and our 10th Army are both newly formed troops, and their combat effectiveness is worrying. If you want to use these troops to resist the German attack, that is almost impossible. Admiral Foch looked worried, even desperate. The breakthrough of the German 1st Army and 8th Army on the left wing undoubtedly dealt a fatal blow to the British and French Allied forces. Now even their capital was under the threat of the Germans. It is estimated that in a few days, the Germans will come to Paris. At that time, how will this battle continue? It's almost impossible to hold Paris with those troops alone. We don't even have the strength to hold Paris now. Don't forget, we are also suppressed by the Germans here. When will the Germans defeat is still very hard to say. Marshal Zafari said. Admiral Foch was taken aback for a moment, and his face turned even paler. Indeed, Paris may not be able to hold on no matter what. After the crushing defeat on the left, the Germans would advance directly to Paris. And here, they also couldn't resist the German attack. Once the British and French Allied forces also suffered a disastrous defeat on the Marne River defense line, they would have no extra troops to defend Paris. Facing the German attack, they will surely fail. However, such a result is undoubtedly somewhat unacceptable to a French army soldier. After all, they were fighting for France, fighting the Germans. But is this war doomed to fail? Marshal, if we lose Paris, will we surrender to the Germans? Admiral Foch asked. Marshal Joffre thought for a while, and then said, this is not something I can decide. It has to be decided by the president and the government. But, as a soldier, I will fight the Germans to the end. Admiral Foch nodded. He was also unwilling to surrender to the Germans. Of course, if the president and the government decide to surrender, there is no other way. Your Excellency Marshal, the Germans once again launched a large-scale shelling of our defense line. They used at least thousands of cannons. Marshal Joffre, a staff officer with a panicked face, reported. Marshal Joffre and Admiral Foch felt tense. Obviously, they all expected the intention of the German army. With the German 1st Army and 8th Army already victorious, the German army on the Marne River defense line couldn't sit still. Order the front line departments, hold the defense line, and prepare to fight the Germans to the end. Marshal Zafari ordered. If their defenses are torn by the Germans and they are defeated, the Germans will be able to encircle Paris. It will be absolutely impossible for the Anglo-French coalition forces stationed in Paris to stop the German attack. All Marshal Joffre can do is to stick to the defense of the Marne River and continue to persevere. As for whether there will be a turning point, it is hard to say. Boom. 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 On the front line of the Marne River, thousands of German cannons are firing fiercely. Carts transporting shells are running back and forth, transporting shells from the ammunition depot to the artillery positions. The gunners, shirtless, loaded shells into the barrels and fired them. The positions of the British and French coalition forces were once again hit by heavy artillery fire from the German army. Although, in the previous battles, the German army almost plowed through the positions of the British and French allied forces with shells. Most of the fortifications were destroyed under the heavy shelling of the German army. The rest are fortifications that have survived the shelling of blind spots. In addition, there are some positions rebuilt by the British and French allied forces taking advantage of the gaps in the shelling of the German army. But now, under the heavy shelling of the German army, all these fortifications have been destroyed again. As for the artillery of the British and French allied forces, they remained silent. They simply don't have much left. The artillery suppression of the German army had been bombed before, and the artillery of the British and French allied forces had already paid extremely heavy losses. The existing cannons were all regarded as treasures by the British and French allied forces, and they did not dare to use them lightly. Rather than letting those cannons be destroyed in the fierce artillery battle with the German army, it is more cost effective to use it to attack the German infantry when the German infantry launches an attack. The German firepower preparations this time did not last long. An hour later, the artillery shells began to extend to the deep positions of the British and French allied forces. The British and French allied forces knew that this was a precursor to the German attack. The reason why the German army did not carry out long-term artillery preparations was, on the one hand, to save shells. After the Battle of the Marne, it may be the turn to attack Paris next time. If the French refused to surrender, the two sides would have to fight a fierce battle there. At that time, Paris, the romantic capital, might also be razed to the ground by German artillery shells. For this reason, the German army naturally had to store as many shells as possible. On the other hand, it was because the defense line of the British and French coalition forces had been almost destroyed long ago, so there was no need to waste shells. Attack. As soon as the artillery fire started to extend, the commander on the front line gave the order to attack. This time, instead of directly dispatching infantry, 4 armored divisions launched an attack in 4 sectors. A large number of black-painted tanks poured out of the German positions like a black tide and rushed towards the positions of the British and French allied forces. These dark tanks formed a torrent of steel that no one could stop. Got German tanks, a lot of tanks, a French soldier said in horror. Damn it, how did the Germans have so many tanks? How could we stand against it? Where are the anti-tank guns and anti-tank guns? Prepare to fight. There are still some brave people who are not intimidated by the huge size of the German tanks and are still ready to continue fighting. However, in the previous battles, the anti-tank guns and gunners of the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses. The remaining anti-tank guns and gunners want to stop so many tanks of the German army. It is undoubtedly a dream. Chapter 517. Withdrawal. Crunch, crunch. The tank's tracks were crushed on the ground, making a compressed sound. The soldiers of the Anglo-French coalition forces on the defense line were even more numb. Some timid people even wet their pants in fright. If the officers hadn't been suppressing them, they might have turned around and fled. When facing these steel monsters, people will feel fear. Tank guns, a mere little bit. German tanks are not indestructible. As long as our tank guns can hit them, we can destroy them. A French officer encouraged the gunners. Several gunners, although very frightened, still carried out the order and manipulated a 37mm anti-tank gun, preparing to attack a German tank. Fire. With the officer's order, the tank gun fired. Boom. The solid armor-piercing projectile roared and flew out of the barrel. In the blink of an eye, the shell hit a German tank. The front armor of the tank, like tofu, was easily cut by armor-piercing bullets. Fragments shot out in all directions, killing the tank soldiers inside in an instant. At the same time, the shell also hit the ammunition depot behind the tank, causing a martyrdom explosion. The entire tank ignited into a fireball. Good job, we killed the German tank. Keep up the good work, and kill another German tank. The officer applauded loudly. It's just that they never had a chance to destroy another German tank. Sensing the threat, the German tanks immediately launched an attack. A shell hit the battery. The tank gun was overturned, and several gunners were killed. Although, in the face of the attack of the powerful German armored forces, a very small number of officers and soldiers of the British and French allied forces chose to resist. Their resistance also caused certain casualties to the German armored forces. Overall, however, these casualties were very limited. The resistance of the Anglo-French coalition forces, like a praying man's arms, will be easily crushed by the German armored forces, especially when the German Air Force appeared on the battlefield, bombing and strafing the German anti-tank fire. PowerPoints made the anti-tank forces of the British and French coalition forces that had suffered heavy losses even worse. Under such circumstances, the consequences can naturally be imagined. Track of the tank easily crushed the barbed wire and directly crushed it to the position of the British and French coalition forces. The machine guns on the tanks began to fire, and the dense bullets were massacring the positions of the British and French Allied forces, smashing the soldiers of the British and French Allied forces who had no time to escape. Go to hell. Damn the Germans. A French soldier, holding an explosive package, rushed towards the German tank. However, before he got close to the tank, he was knocked to the ground by the machine gun fire on the tank. More and more tanks entered the positions of the British and French coalition forces and began to slaughter these poor soldiers. Countless German infantry fighting behind the tanks also took the opportunity to break into the positions of the British and French Allied forces. With the assistance of tanks, they wiped out the soldiers of the British and French coalition forces on the position. The British and French Allied forces, which suffered heavy losses, began a large-scale retreat. However, on the south bank of the Marne River defense line, there were only 2 lines of defense left by the British and French Allied forces. After the first line of defense is breached, the German army will immediately attack the second line of defense. It is almost impossible for the British and French Allied forces to resist. Under such circumstances, where can they retreat? Run away. We can't resist the German attack. Cowards, you cowards, come back to me. A British officer shouted loudly. However, then a tank rushed in front of him. The tank ran over him directly, and the severe pain made him let out that heart-piercing scream. When the tank passed by, there was only a pool of muddy meat left on the ground. Long blood stains appeared on the ground along with the tank's tracks. It can be seen that there is still a lot of meat in the gaps in the track of the tank. A German soldier happened to see this scene. Then, he bent over and vomited loudly. Facing the attack of the German armored forces, the first line of defense of the British and French Allied forces was broken through without even holding out for an hour. The remaining troops fled to the second line of defense in a panic. However, the officers and soldiers of the British and French Allied forces obviously have no confidence in whether they can hold the second line of defense. The German army used tanks on a large scale during the offensive. The powerful attack power of this armored weapon was really irresistible to them. Your Excellency Marshal, the first line of defense has been breached. The Germans are about to attack the second line of defense. It is estimated that before noon, our second line of defense will also be breached. The Germans will completely break through the entire Marne River defense line. Admiral Foch smiled dryly. Although they had expected such a result a long time ago. However, they could not have imagined that the German army's attack would be so swift and violent that they could not stop it at all. Once the second line of defense is also breached, our troops stationed in Champagne Châlons, Epinay and Château-Thierry may completely fall into the encirclement of the Germans. At that time, these troops will only have a dead end. Admiral Foch continued. Although, the French Second Army, Fourth Army and British Expeditionary Force Second Army stationed in these 3 cities have suffered heavy losses. However, there are still many troops that are still fighting. If the second line of defense is also breached, then these 3 cities will be completely surrounded by the German army. The consequences of the officers and soldiers of the British and French coalition forces trapped in these cities can be imagined. There is no other way. We have tried our best, but we still cannot resist the German attack. Marshal Ziafoe sighed. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. We have done our best. Admiral Foch said. This time, failure is inevitable. However, this is not because of their own reasons, but because the Germans are too strong. They are so strong that they are no match for the Germans, even if they try their best. The army has already suffered too much loss, and it cannot continue to fight like this. Otherwise, it is not far from collapse. Marshal Ziafoe said. In his heart, it seemed that he had already made up his mind. Command the troops, retreat. the 2nd Army, the 4th Army, the 6th Army, the 8th Army, the 9th Army and the 2nd Army of the British Expeditionary Force retreat to Paris. The 3rd Army and the 5th Army from Vernes climb and evacuate to the south. Marshal Joffre ordered. Chapter 518, Crisis in France. The retreat of the British and French Allied forces on the Marne River indicated that the British and French Allied forces were completely at a disadvantage in the battle with the German army. Marshal Joffre ordered the remaining troops, except for the French 3rd Army and 5th Army, to gather in Paris and prepare to defend Paris. Of course, at this point, it may still be up to the French government to decide whether or not to continue this battle. Marshal Joffre received an order from French President Poincaré to return to Paris ahead of schedule. He handed over the task of retreat to Admiral Foch. When Marshal Joffre arrived at the presidential office of the Élysée Palace, he found that besides him, Sir French, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, was also here. Your Excellency, Marshal, I'm afraid that we will not be able to defeat the Germans this time. Sir French seemed very concerned about the situation. The British Expeditionary Force suffered a big loss in this war. The 1st Army was severely damaged, the 2nd Army was also severely damaged, and the 3rd Army was completely wiped out. Now only the 4th Army and the newly formed 5th Army in western France are left. It can be said that the entire expeditionary force lost nearly half of its strength. The combat power is only about 1/3 left. Under such circumstances, the British Expeditionary Force undoubtedly lost the courage to continue fighting. No, sir. Although the current situation is very difficult for us, we cannot just give up. We still have troops, and we can continue to fight. I have ordered that the 11th and 12th Armies are going north. In addition, 2nd will also suggest to His Excellency the President to form more army groups in southern France. Marshal Joffre said. Compared with the losses of the British Expeditionary Force, the losses of the French army were greater. Almost all of the several armies on the Marne River defense line were disabled. Add the losses of the 1st Army and the losses of the 3rd and 5th Armies at Verdun. So far, the French army has lost more than 800,000. Such a heavy loss is undoubtedly traumatic for France. After all, the total population of this country is only over 30 million. Even if it is an extreme mobilization, it can mobilize a maximum of 3 million troops. You must know that France now has mobilized 12 group armies with 2.4 million people, which is not far from the figure of 3 million. Marshal Joffre said this, naturally because he wanted Sir French to see his determination, so that the British Expeditionary Force could assist them and continue fighting. After all, with France's own strength, it is obviously impossible to confront Germany. At this time, the assistance of the British Expeditionary Force became especially important. Your Excellency, Marshal, your courage is very admirable. However, we also need to ask the country for instructions on what to do with the Expeditionary Force. Sir French said. Of course, he is probably not optimistic about the resistance of the French personally. After all, France has lost too many troops in this war. Even if they mobilize further, how many troops can they mobilize? Sir French was very suspicious of this. In addition, he does not think that those newly formed troops are the opponents of the German army. The previous battles have undoubtedly proved how strong the German army is. Even the elite troops of the British and French allied forces were no match for the German army, not to mention the hastily formed new troops. Those new troops were simply sent to die. Thinking of this, Sir French was also worried about the fate of the British Empire. France's failure seems to be doomed. Then, after France fails, it may be Britain's turn. The British Navy has failed. If the British do not surrender, the Germans will definitely land on the British mainland. At that time, the British army will have to fight these fierce German troops. And can the British army withstand the German attack? That is obviously unlikely. However, in order to defend their country, they had to fight the Germans desperately. This made Sir French very distressed. Your Excellency, no matter what, we will continue to fight. It will never be so easy for the Germans to defeat the French Republic. French soldiers will fight to the end. Marshal Joffre said firmly again. Sir French nodded, but said nothing more. Marshal Joffre and Sir French walked to the office of President Poincaré together. When they entered the office, they found that not only President Poincaré was there, but Prime Minister René Viviani, Foreign Minister Theophile Delcase, Secretary of War Alexander Millerand, Secretary of the Navy Victor Gagner and Minister of Finance Alexander Ribot are already waiting here. These people are undoubtedly the people in power of the French government. They were eager to see Marshal Joffre and Sir French. No doubt they hope to have a deep understanding of the upcoming battle situation, so that in the future, they can make a correct judgment on the situation. Your Excellency Marshal, sir, please sit down, President Poincaré said. He seemed to be trying hard to squeeze a smile on his face, but he couldn't do it at all. It made the smile on his face very ugly, as if it was a fake smile. Marshal Joffre and Sir French both knew President Poincaré's current mood, and didn't care about it. After all, as the President of the French Republic, their army has suffered an unprecedented fiasco on the battlefield, and their country will even lose in this war, and then their country is likely to perish because of it. This is undoubtedly an unbearable pressure for anyone. Marshal Joffre and Sir French nodded, and sat down in their seats. President Poincaré glanced at everyone in the office, and then said, "Gentlemen, the current French Republic has reached the most critical moment. Our army was defeated by the Germans on the front line, and suffered heavy losses. Now, the German army is approaching Paris. What should we do next?" These senior officials of the French government all have very ugly faces. They probably didn't expect that the situation would deteriorate to such a degree. At the beginning of the war, even when the German army stormed last year, and was only tens of kilometers away from Paris, they were not as desperate as they are now. They have always believed that Germany can win the war. But now, no one thinks so anymore. They are very clear that this time the French Republic may really perish. Chapter 519. Keep playing. Your Excellency, although the current situation is very unfavorable to us, we can continue to fight. We still have more than 1 million troops, and our British allies also have hundreds of thousands of troops. If we continue to fight, a miracle may happen. Marshal Zayafei expressed her attitude without hesitation. President Poincaré nodded and looked at the others. Marshal, if we continue to fight, are we sure of winning? The French Republic has already lost too many troops in this war. Prime Minister René Viviani asked. Obviously, with heavy losses and little hope of victory in sight, the French government's position has been somewhat shaken. Since it is doomed to fail, why continue to fight? In that case, I'm afraid it will only make them pay a higher price and let more people die. No, Your Excellency, Prime Minister. Although our chances of winning are not great, we still have a chance of winning. If we surrender to the Germans, then the Germans will definitely slaughter us. At that time, we will lose a large piece of land. The territory of the country has to bear the heavy burden of war reparations. France will sink from now on, and there will be no chance to rise again. Marshal Joffre said. The faces of the bigwigs present at the meeting were ugly, but they all had to admit that what Marshal Joffre said was correct. From the information they obtained, Russia paid a high price in order to withdraw from the war. If France surrenders, it will undoubtedly be sent to the door by itself, and let the Germans slaughter it. At that time, the Germans will definitely not be polite. Maybe they will put forward harsher conditions than those for Russia. Hey, if the current rules of war follow the rules of more than 200 years ago, that would be great. Secretary of War Alexander Millerand said. Everyone was taken aback for a moment, but then smiled dryly. They all understood what Alexander Millerand meant. However, that is obviously impossible. In Europe more than 200 years ago, although many wars also broke out, but at that time, no country would perish, or even lose its territory because of war. If you are defeated, you only need to bow your head to admit your mistake, apologize, and make some sense, then everything will be over. It's not like now, destroying the country at every turn. Of course, mentioning this point undoubtedly shows how little confidence the French have in this war. His Excellency, Foreign Minister, if we surrender, what harsh conditions will the Germans probably ask? President Poincaré asked. Your Excellency, with the style of the Germans in this war, they probably will kill us severely. First of all, in terms of territory, the territory in the northern part of the Republic may have to be lost, even including Paris. Secondly, the compensation on the one hand, the Germans have always opened their mouths. With the prosperity of the Republic, the Germans may ask for 20 billion marks or more in reparations. Foreign Minister Theophile Delcasse guessed. Of course, this is just his personal guess. But even so, it has already made the faces of President Poincaré and others very ugly. Such conditions, if they agree, then France will really be no different from subjugation. Northern France is the most fertile place in France, and has the strongest industrial base. If it is ceded to Germany, it will make France a second-tier country in Europe. Not to mention, Paris is the capital in the hearts of all French people, and it is also their spiritual symbol. Once Paris is also ceded to Germany, is France still France? In addition, the compensation of 20 marks is undoubtedly a huge burden. Although, France is very rich. Their overseas loans are as high as 50 billion francs, which is equivalent to DM, which is almost 40 billion Deutschmarks. However, this money cannot be easily withdrawn. What's more, the 20 billion mark is just Theophile Delcasse's own guess. Maybe the Germans' request will be higher than this. France absolutely cannot agree to such harsh conditions. Gentlemen, if the Germans really propose such a condition, even harsher than this, can we agree? President Poincaré asked. The senior French government officials attending the meeting shook their heads again and again. If they even agree to such a condition, then they will definitely become sinners through the ages, and become the targets of all the French. Your Excellency, we must never agree to the harsh conditions of the Germans, and we must never surrender to the Germans. If we continue to fight, we may have a chance to win. Marshal Joffre continued. Oh. President Poincaré and others immediately focused their attention on Marshal Joffre. If it can win, or even draw, it will be a great thing for France. That way, at least they don't have to pay too much. Your Excellency, on the British side, don't you want our navy to cooperate with them? If the navies of the British, French and Italian kingdoms combine to defeat the German navy, then the Germans will not have much advantage. As long as we continue to France resisted the German attack, gradually, the balance of victory will be tilted in our favor. Marshal Joffre said. Navy, Your Excellency the Secretary of the Navy, can our navy defeat the Germans? Asked President Poincaré. Your Excellency, the Navy of the Republic has set sail, and is headed for England. According to the plan, it will cooperate with the British fleet. The fleet purchased by the United Kingdom from the United States is expected to return to the United Kingdom next month. At that time, we will unite to fight against Germany. As for whether it is hard to say that the Germans will be defeated. But judging from the strength of the two sides, the gap is not that big. If you are a little bit lucky, victory is entirely possible. Navy Minister Victor Gagnon said. Since this is the case, Your Excellency, I think we can continue to fight. No matter how bad it is, we can delay it a little longer. After the decisive battle between the Navy and the German Navy is over, we can decide what to do next according to the situation. If the Navy can win, then we can continue the war and persist until the day of victory. If the Navy fails this time, then I think there is no need for us to persist. Prime Minister René Viviani said. President Poincaré nodded. If you have no other opinions, then let's do this. May God bless the Navy and let us defeat the Germans. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 520, Escape from Paris. Your Excellency, I hope to form the 13th Army, the 14th Army and the 15th Army. Marshal Zaiafi said. Form 3 more armies? President Poincaré frowned. If 3 more group armies are formed, the French army will form a total of 15 group armies, with a total strength of more than 3 million. Moreover, this almost wiped out all the young and middle-aged people in France. Sending the people there to die on the battlefield will be a heavy blow to French society and the entire French nation. Your Excellency, we need to prepare for the follow-up operations. If we want to continue to resist the German attack, we must have a stronger force. With the heavy losses of the frontline ministries, the newly formed 3rd Army Group will allow us to have more strength to fight against the Germans. Only in this way can we persist until the end. Otherwise, we may not be able to persist until the day when the Navy wins. Marshal Joffre continued, Your Excellency, Marshal, the war has caused the government to pile up debts. If you want to form 3 more army groups, you will undoubtedly need a lot of money, and the government may not be able to spend that much money anymore. Minister of Finance Alexander Ribates said, no matter how difficult it is, the financial problem must be resolved. If we lose the war, the price we pay will be far more than the formation of 3 new army groups. Marshal Zayafy said. Alexander Ribat said no more, but looked at President Poincaré, as if waiting for his decision. If President Poincaré decided to build more troops, he would naturally have no objection. Marshal Joffre, I agree with you to form 3 more group armies. However, this is the last 3 group armies. Next, we have no extra funds, and no extra soldiers to form new troops. President Poincaré reminded. He said this to remind Marshal Zayafy, so that Marshal Zayafy will not form more troops after this time. In that case, it would be endless. Yes, Your Excellency the President. Marshal Joffre nodded. Of course he knew that the country's mobilization was approaching its limit, and he was already satisfied with being able to form 3 more army groups. Your Excellency, the French Republic has decided to continue the war. Then, is the British Empire willing to continue fighting? I think the British Empire should continue to support the French Republic at this time. President Poincaré said, Your Excellency, I will report France's attitude to the country. Personally, I'm naturally willing to continue to support France in fighting the war, sir. French said. Like France, the British Empire did not want to surrender to Germany. Then, they must continue to fight the war. Not to mention, they are deliberately preparing to restore the strength of the Royal Navy before a decisive battle with the German Navy. It's just that it will take time for the Royal Navy to get ready again. In order to win, the British Army naturally needs to buy enough preparation time for the Navy. Now, the French are willing to continue the war, which is naturally the best. What's more, the longer the French and the Germans fought, the harder they fought, which was of great benefit to the British Empire. At least it can make Germany pay more losses on the French battlefield, thereby weakening Germany's power. President Poincaré nodded. The British are willing to continue fighting, which is naturally the best. In this case, they can have greater strength to fight against the Germans. So, gentlemen, what should we do next? The Germans' next attack target must be Paris. President Poincaré said. There is no doubt that Paris has become a very dangerous place now. When the German army approached Paris, it would become a battlefield. For President Poincaré, he naturally does not want to be in the middle of a battlefield. Your Excellency, Paris is the capital of the French Republic. If a war breaks out here, Paris will be in ruins. This is undoubtedly a sad thing. Perhaps we should try our best to avoid Paris from being caught in the war. Prime Minister Viviani said. Oh, is there any way? Asked President Poincaré. Perhaps we can evacuate Paris. Then, declare Paris an undefended city. Prime Minister René Viviani suggested. What? Make Paris undefended? How can this be possible? Marshal Joffre exclaimed. Your Excellency, Prime Minister, this is absolutely impossible. Isn't this handing over Paris to the Germans? I would rather go to war with the Germans in Paris. Even if Paris is turned into ruins, it is absolutely impossible to hand over Paris to the Germans like this. Marshal Zayafy's attitude was very firm. Prime Minister René Viviani's complexion suddenly turned a little ugly. Your Excellency the Marshal, Your Excellency the Prime Minister has no other intentions. He just doesn't want the beautiful city of Paris to be destroyed in the flames of war. President Poincaré said, No, Your Excellency. However, I still think that we need to fight the Germans in Paris. Paris is a big city. If we fight the Germans here, the Germans will have to pay a very heavy price to be able to occupy Paris. Abandoning Paris would certainly be doing the Germans a favor. If Paris is destroyed in the war, we can easily rebuild Paris. But if France loses the war, then everything is over. Joffre said the Marshal. Your Excellency, I suggest that government agencies evacuate Paris immediately, and civilians also evacuate Paris. I will let the troops withdrawn from the front line enter Paris. We will fight the Germans here to the death. Marshal Joffre said. President Poincaré opened his mouth, but in the end he said nothing. The next day, French President Poincaré Prime Minister René Viviani, and all members of the government all evacuated Paris and fled to the south of France. At the same time, millions of residents in Paris also fled Paris in panic. These Parisians fled Paris with their families and mouths, with salutes, or by car, or in a carriage, or even on foot. They all knew that Paris would soon become a battlefield. These civilians don't want to be killed in battle. Therefore, fleeing Paris became the only option. Contrary to these people, the French army is rushing to Paris from various places, preparing to fight the German army here. Chapter 521. Soldiers approaching the city. Paris, the largest city in Europe and even the world, is about to fall into the flames of war. Here, it was originally a romantic capital for people to go out. However, this place will soon be destroyed and become a ruin. I don't know how many people there are, and I feel sorry for this. The whole of Paris, in just 2 days, became a ghost city. Of course, this refers to the civilians living here who have all left. However, the number of soldiers entering the city was quite large, reaching hundreds of thousands. They will use the city of Paris as a battlefield to fight the German invaders to the end. French Army Command, Marshal Joffre continues to work here. Of course, he will not stay in Paris forever, and soon, he will leave here. The battle for Paris will be in the charge of the Paris garrison commander. As the commander of the Paris garrison, it was Admiral Gallieni, commander of the French 10th Army. The 200,000 people in his 10th Army will become the main force to defend Paris. In addition, the troops deployed in Paris also included the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force and the remaining troops of the 1st Army of the French Army. The total strength of the British and French coalition forces deployed in Paris will reach 500,000. As for the remaining British and French allied forces, they withdrew further south. They hope that Paris can become a meat grinder, where the German army can shed blood. In this case, the troops of the British and French allied forces who evacuated to the south may launch a counterattack and defeat the German army in one fell swoop. Of course, this is a battle plan formulated by the British and French coalition forces. As for whether this battle plan can be successfully realized, it is very difficult to say. After all, everyone made it clear that the German army was too strong. Whether it will be successful or not is unknown. Marshal, according to the plan, all the ministries have already entered Paris. Our total strength in Paris will reach 500,000. Now, the officers and soldiers are rushing to repair the fortifications. When the Germans attack Paris, they will find that Paris has become a solid fortress. At that time, we will definitely let the Germans shed blood here. The commander of the French 10th Army and the commander of the Paris garrison, Admiral Gallieni, said. Marshal Joffre nodded. He believed that Admiral Gallieni and all the troops guarding Paris would do their best. However, it is very difficult to say whether they can achieve their expected strategy goals. General Gallieni, Paris will be handed over to you. I know that it is almost impossible to completely defend Paris and prevent Paris from falling into the hands of the Germans. The Germans are too powerful. Their strength far surpassed ours. No one thought that the Germans would make such preparations and form such a powerful army for this war. If we were defeated by the Germans in this war, it would not be because of our own reasons, but because the Germans are too strong. Marshal Joffre said. He said this, naturally, because he didn't want General Gallieni to have too much burden. After all, defending Paris to the death is already a very difficult task. If it is not done well, it will really die here. Yes, Marshal. Admiral Gallieni nodded. He knew early on that this was hard work. Subsequently, Marshal Joffre summoned General Allenby, commander of the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force, and General Despierre, commander of the 1st French Army. Marshal Zayafy asked them to lead the troops to persist in Paris, and persist for as long as possible. In this case, not only is buying time for the French Republic, but also buying time for the British Empire. In addition, Marshal Joffre also specifically asked Admiral Despierre and Admiral Allenby to obey the command of Admiral Gallieni. Because the three of them are all generals, if something happens to them, no one will listen to the other. This will undoubtedly make Paris' defense very bad. At that time, if you want to continue in Paris, it will be empty talk. In front of Marshal Joffre, Admiral Despierre and Admiral Allenby both expressed that they would obey the command of Admiral Gallieni. especially Admiral Allenby. Although he is the general of the British Army, Marshal Joffre is not only the commander-in-chief of the French army, but also the commander-in-chief of the British and French coalition forces. After explaining all this, Marshal Joffre left Paris. At this moment, Paris has completely become a defense zone of the French army, and almost no civilians live here. On the contrary, those who were able to leave all left Paris. In order to be able to defeat the German army, the French did not hesitate to turn their capital into ruins in the midst of the war. Paris is transforming into a fortress with the efforts of hundreds of thousands of French troops. Of course, all the French soldiers could do was dig defensive positions outside Paris, on the streets of the city, build barricades, arrange artillery positions and firepower points, etc., to prepare for the next battle. After all, Paris is a big city, and it will undoubtedly take a long time, and consume a lot of materials to completely build this place into a fortress. The French army simply didn't have that much time, nor did they have that much material to waste. The German army at this moment is approaching Paris. The German 1st Army and 8th Army are approaching Paris from the west. The German 2nd Army and 5th Army were approaching Paris from the east. As for the other 4 legions, there are other tasks. Of course, the Duke of Württemberg, commander of the German 4th Army, was very dissatisfied with not participating in the attack on Paris. In his opinion, attacking Paris and taking down the capital of the old enemy France is undoubtedly a great achievement. However, Qin Tian didn't let him participate in it, which was clearly aimed at him deliberately. However, in view of Qin Tian's influence in Germany and the German army, even if the Duke of Württemberg was dissatisfied, he did not dare to show it. On April 16th, the German army had already approached the city of Paris. The 1st Army, located southwest of Paris, had captured Versailles. The 8th Army was located at Saint Denis in the northwest of Paris. The 2nd Army captured Créteil in the southwest, and the 5th Army captured Chelles in the northwest. 4 legions have surrounded Paris from 4 directions. Of course, it is undoubtedly very difficult to encircle a big city like Paris with a force of more than 800,000. What's more, there are more than 500,000 French troops in the city. This made the encirclement of the German army not tight, but even so, it would undoubtedly be very difficult for the French army to escape Paris. Unless it's a small-scale operation. The large forces of the French army have been firmly trapped in Paris. Of course, the French army will not flee. Their task is to face the German army here. Chapter 522, Ridiculous. Qin Tian set up his headquarters in Versailles. Although, here is just a small town on the outskirts of Paris. However, it is famous here. In the Franco-Prussian War decades ago, after the Kingdom of Prussia defeated the Second French Empire, William I was crowned emperor here and established a unified German empire. Of course, that has become an eternal pain in the hearts of all French people. France and Germany have thus become old enemies. However, in this war, Germany once again had the absolute upper hand. The German army occupied Versailles again. The whole of Paris has fallen into the siege of the German army. It can be said that Germany is not far from victory in this war. Your Highness. General Crook, commander of the 1st Army Corps, beamed with joy. The left-wing group won a big victory on the battlefield of Rouen, so that William II sent a telegram to commend him. This made Admiral Crook very happy. General Crook, I set up the headquarters here. It affects you? Qin Tian said with a smile. Your Highness, you are too polite. It is our honor that you can set up the headquarters in the defense zone of the 1st Army. Besides, Versailles is a famous city. The glory of the German Empire was established here. I believe that, under the leadership of His Highness, the German Empire will usher in new glory here. General Crook has completely convinced Qin Tian. Qin Tian's performance has almost conquered everyone in the German army. Everyone believed that Qin Tian would be the future leader of the German Empire. Qin Tian nodded. General Below, General Dimmling, and General Ludendorff came to see me. Before launching an attack on Paris, we need to discuss how to attack. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein immediately went to make arrangements. On the afternoon of April 16th, the commanders of the German 1st Army, 2nd Army, 5th Army and 8th Army all arrived at the headquarters in Versailles. Everyone's faces were beaming. None of them seemed to have imagined that this time the battle would go so smoothly. In just half a month, they had already approached the city of Paris. As long as Paris is taken, the possibility of the French continuing to resist is very small. Of course, even if the French continue to fight, the German army has enough strength to defeat them. This undoubtedly means that Germany is not far from winning the final victory of the war. Everyone, now, Paris is close at hand. As long as we win Paris, then this battle can almost come to an end. However, I hope that everyone will not be proud in the next attack on Paris. After all, although the French army has been severely damaged by us, there is still a long way to go before they are defeated. If we are defeated in the city of Paris due to complacency and negligence, it will completely ruin the empire's hegemony. I don't want that to happen. Qin Tian said. The so-called half-90 people who travel 100 miles are now only one step away from Germany defeating France. He also knew that the continuous victories made many officers and soldiers a little proud and compact. Qin Tian didn't want this to affect the next battle. Yes, Your Highness. Seeing Qin Tian's serious expression, several commanders immediately replied. For the attack on Paris, let's attack the center of Paris according to the current garrison of the legions. Although, according to the information we have obtained, there are still 500,000 British and French troops in Paris. However, I hope that we can take the go to Paris. At the latest, this time cannot exceed 2 weeks. Qin Tian said. Although, it seems a bit too unrealistic to take down Paris within 2 weeks, and at the same time, eliminate hundreds of thousands of officers and soldiers of the British and French coalition forces inside. However, the commanders of several army groups believed that this was not impossible. After all, the elite troops of the British and French allied forces were almost wiped out by them in the previous battles. Most of the rest are new troops that have just been formed and have poor training. Facing the elite troops of the German army, it is no wonder that they can withstand it. Your Highness, it is difficult to take Paris within a week. However, there should be no problem in taking Paris within 2 weeks. Admiral Crook said. Yes, Your Highness. The fighting will of the British and French allied forces has been completely shattered by us. I believe that the British and French allied forces in Paris are also not determined to fight us to the end. Admiral Dimlin also said. Your Highness, the French undoubtedly made a mistake when they deployed their troops to defend Paris. They should not have placed the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force in Paris. After all, Paris is the capital of the French, not the British. The French may come to fight us for Paris, but the British will not. Lieutenant General Ludendorff also said. Qin Tian couldn't help laughing. He guessed that Marshal Zafari probably didn't think so much at the time. Since this is the case, our chances of winning Paris will be even greater. I hope that we will be able to win soon. Qin Tian said. The Empire will win. Several generals were full of confidence. At this moment, Major General Manstein came in. Your Highness, a domestic telegram. Major General Manstein handed the telegram to Qin Tian. Qin Tian took the telegram and looked at it, and his face immediately turned a little ugly. Your Highness, has something happened? Major General Ludendorff asked. Humph. This is a telegram from His Majesty the Emperor. His Majesty said that there are many so-called artists in China who claim that Paris is a capital of art. The buildings inside are all cultural relics. When we attack Paris, we must pay attention to protecting those buildings. If those buildings are destroyed, it will cause the loss of the artistic wealth of all mankind. Qin Tian said. However, his expression was full of teasing. Fart. Do you want us to not fire artillery when we attack Paris? Do we not bomb? In that case, wouldn't it be that our soldiers are sent to die? Those shameless guys, if they want to say that, they will go to Paris by themselves, shoot it down. Admiral Crook immediately became angry. Yes, Your Highness. Our advantage lies in our firepower. If we abandon this aspect, it will be impossible to win Paris within 2 weeks. Even our losses will definitely exceed expectations. General Luo also said. Qin Tian nodded. Your Majesty just forwarded the telegram to us and did not force us to abide by it. I have always believed that the lives of soldiers are the most important thing to report. As for those works of art and cultural relics, let them to asterisk with it. Chapter 523. Ignore it. Qin Tian has always attached great importance to the lives of soldiers. On the one hand, Germany has a small number of soldiers, and the soldiers are all young and strong. If one dies, there will be one less one. It is naturally the best to be able to die less in the war. On the other hand, the reason why Qin Tian is deeply loved by everyone in the army has a lot to do with this aspect. This is also reflected in the command operations of the German 8th Army. The officers will not let the soldiers work hard for problems that can be solved with shells. Although this has increased the logistical pressure on the troops a lot, it has effectively reduced the casualties of the troops. This kind of command ideology is now widely supported by the generals of the German army. After all, in war, life is inherently fragile. It is undoubtedly a blessing for the majority of soldiers that the superiors can value the lives of soldiers. So, Qin Tian turned a blind eye to the demands of those artists. Of course, works of art and cultural relics and antiques are very important. But in Qin Tian's eyes, the lives of his soldiers are the most important. Everyone, we don't care about those guys' requests. We should fight as we should. Artillery and air force will still participate in this battle against Paris. If necessary, armored forces can also participate in the attack. I only have one requirement, that is, 1 week at the best, 2 weeks at the latest. Paris must be taken. Qin Tian said solemnly. Yes, Your Highness. Everyone replied. Qin Tian ignored the demands of the so-called artists and still approved the use of heavy weapons in Paris. This made the generals heave a sigh of relief, and was also very moved. Although, if Paris is really turned into ruins, Qin Tian, as the commander, will inevitably bear a lot of pressure. However, if Paris is really turned into ruins, Qin Tian, as the commander, will inevitably bear a lot of pressure. Qin Tian was not afraid of this, and everything was considered for the sake of the soldiers. In the eyes of these generals, this is undoubtedly commendable. After all, after this battle, Qin Tian might be disliked by those guys in the field of art. On April 17th, the German attack on Paris officially began. The 4 legions of the German army, with a total of 53 infantry divisions, assembled more than 900 150mm heavy howitzers, 1,900 105mm light howitzers and 2,875mm field guns, and launched an attack on Paris. According to the tactics of the German army, it is undoubtedly necessary to carry out long-term firepower preparations before the infantry attack is officially launched. In this way, it is possible to clear the obstacles for the follow-up infantry to attack, and effectively reduce the casualties of the troops. So, this attack on Paris is also the same. The 4 legions of the German army almost surrounded Paris. In terms of the range of cannons, the whole of Paris is covered within the range of these cannons. If the German army is willing, it will be no problem at all to blow Paris into ruins with artillery shells. Of course, in that case, the required shells would be an astronomical figure. Boom. 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 The cannons of each door began to roar, and the shells roared and smashed into the city of Paris. Cannonballs fell from the sky like raindrops, and violent explosions erupted one after another in the urban area of Paris. Of course, when the bombardment just started, the main target of the German bombardment was the French positions on the outskirts of Paris. Only a small number of shells fell into the urban area of Paris. But even so, this behavior of the German army has made the whole world dumbfounded. Boom. A 150mm artillery shell hit the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. The violent explosion collapsed the Arc de Triomphe. A 105mm artillery shell hit the Eiffel Tower. Although it didn't blow up the tower, it blew a big hole. As the German bombardment becomes more and more violent, it is foreseeable that all the cultural relics and historic sites in Paris may be destroyed by the German bombardment. A world-renowned cultural city will be destroyed under the claws of the German army. The firepower preparation of the German army not only included shelling, but the 4 German air forces also participated in the bombing of Paris. 4 air teams, with thousands of combat aircraft, half of fighters and half of bombers. These combat aircraft, divided into several batches, bombed Paris. Drop the bomb. Following the commander's order, dozens of bombers dropped bombs. One bomb after another, like dumplings, fell into the urban area of Paris. The dense explosions destroyed the entire street. Unfortunately, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Hugo's novel is here. After the bombing ended, the entire street was in ruins. Notre Dame de Paris was also bombed. Paris Garrison Command, located in the underground warehouse of a department store in the center of Paris. After the Garrison Command requisitioned this place, it was remodeled and turned into a headquarters. Admiral Gallieni, the commander of the French 10th Army and Paris Garrison, worked here. Allenby, commander of the 4th Army of the British Expeditionary Force, and General Despierre, commander of the 1st French Army, also stayed here most of the time. When the German artillery sounded, Admiral Allenby was talking nonsense. Now, there is a tide of discussion in the entire international community, which will definitely bring enormous pressure to the Germans. After all, Paris is a world-famous city. If it is destroyed in the fire of war, it will be a loss for all human beings all over the world. If the Germans could be pressured to attack Paris without the use of artillery and aircraft, the chances of us holding Paris would undoubtedly be much greater. At that time, we might even be able to take advantage of our preparedness. Those fortifications dealt a heavy blow to the Germans and caused the Germans to shed blood in Paris. Admiral Allenby said triumphantly. The reason why the world's cultural and artistic fields care about Paris is entirely because of the instigation of the French and the British, and the Americans also contributed to the flames, which made this problem infinitely magnified. They are trying to form a pressure on Germany in the international community, so that Germany will be wary of attacking Paris. It would be best if Germany gave up attacking Paris. In this case, the British and French allied forces can hide in Paris, posing a great threat to the German army, thereby restraining a large number of German troops. It is undoubtedly more difficult for the German army to defeat the British and French allied forces. If Germany is under pressure to abandon the use of heavy artillery and other weapons in the battle to attack Paris, it will be in their arms. The British and French allied forces could use pre-built defensive positions and firepower points to make the German army pay a heavy price in the battle to attack Paris, and even reverse the situation. Chapter 524, Barbarian. General Allenby, will the Germans really give up attacking Paris because of this? Admiral Despierre was somewhat disbelieving. After all, the so-called pressure from international public opinion is nothing short of illusory. Compared with the outcome of a war, this is undoubtedly too insignificant. It is absurd to think about relying on the so-called pressure of international public opinion to force the Germans to give up their strategic goals. General Despierre, this is not impossible. You know, the Germans have always wanted to replace the Reich and become the leader of the world. If we can ruin their reputation, how can they to lead the world? In order to maintain their reputation, the Germans will definitely consider it carefully. Of course, if the Germans really don't want these false names, there is nothing they can do. However, in my opinion, the possibility of the Germans being fooled is very sensitive. After all, the Germans' brains are like precision instruments, and it may be no problem to let them engage in scientific research. However, it would be a bit too embarrassing for them to think about these things. AI Admiral Allenby said confidently. After hearing this, Admiral Gallieni nodded again and again. It would be great if the Germans can really use the mouse to attack Paris. In this way, we will be able to let the Germans bleed in Paris. We will win this war. The Germans will lose the chance to defeat the French Republic. These generals of the British and French allied forces have begun to daydream. It's just that they will soon know how wrong they are. As the Crown Prince of Germany, Qin Tian didn't care about the so-called international public opinion at all. He only cares about whether the German army can win this battle with the least cost, which is what he values. As for those other things, it doesn't matter at all. Boom. 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 When the explosion sounded, the three people in the office froze for a moment. The expressions on their faces were completely frozen. In particular, Admiral Allenby, who was so confident before, claimed that the German army would definitely not attack Paris, and even if it did, it would not use heavy artillery. However, the sound of the explosion that suddenly came to his ears was like a slap, slapping him fiercely on the face, stunned him, as if he had become a statue all of a sudden. God, how is this possible? How could the Germans fire? Do they want to be scolded by the whole world? Admiral Allenby murmured. Obviously some can't believe that the German army dared to fire. You know, this is Paris. a world-renowned cultural city. If the Germans dare to use heavy artillery here, are they not afraid of destroying it and being condemned by public opinion all over the world? Boom. 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 The continuous sound of explosions came continuously. Obviously, this is undoubtedly the fact. Admiral Allenby's face turned livid. He knew that he had completely lost face this time. Admiral Gallieni and Admiral Despierre both looked very ugly. They all believed that, if the German army stormed Paris, they would definitely be unable to resist it with their 500,000 people alone. Therefore, after Admiral Allenby proposed this plan, they will actively contact the headquarters and the government to help promote it. Allenby also contacted the British side to create momentum. But what they didn't expect was that they had been busy for so long, but it turned out to be of no use at all. The Germans didn't take the so-called pressure into account at all and still launched an offensive. The heavy artillery that should be used is still used. What should we do now? Admiral Despierre's eyes flashed with horror. Obviously, Admiral Despierre believes that the Germans have no scruples now and directly launched an attack on Paris. It is simply impossible for them to resist the German attack or even defeat the Germans on their own. Now we can only rely on ourselves. Order all the troops and prepare for battle, Admiral Gallieni said with a serious face. Suddenly, more intensive explosions sounded, as if the entire earth was shaking. Damn it, this is a bombing by the Germans. They not only used heavy artillery, but also used planes. Do they really want to destroy Paris? Admiral Gallieni's expression changed drastically. The savage, the Crown Prince of Germany, is simply a savage. Doesn't he know the importance of Paris? He actually used heavy artillery and planes to attack Paris. He is such a bastard. Admiral Allenby cursed. However, it is too late to say these now. The German army undoubtedly used their actual actions to show their attitude. That is, they would not care about anything else at all, and they would only do their best to take down Paris. My own capital was bombarded and bombed wantonly by the Germans, which made Admiral Gallieni and Admiral Despierre feel very uncomfortable. However, they also have no other way. Now that the German army has launched an offensive, they can only do their best to fight the Germans. Other than that, there is no other way. The German army brazenly shelled and bombed Paris, which also shocked the French and British governments. They originally thought that, by taking advantage of Paris's status in the field of culture and art, they would give the Germans a good hand. But unexpectedly, the Germans simply ignored this and launched an attack directly. Paris, a world-famous city, has been gradually turned into ruins under the shelling and bombing of the Germans. This behavior of the Germans is undoubtedly extremely barbaric. They are destroying a world-renowned cultural city. They are barbarians who destroy the treasures of human art. The whole world should spurn the Germans, even if they won the war, but their unscrupulous behavior is unacceptable to the whole world. The French Republic will never compromise and bow to the Germans. We will continue to fight. One day, what the Germans did in Paris, it will be doubled back to them. French President Poincaré made a radio speech, condemning the German shelling and bombing of Paris. At the same time, he called on more French people to continue fighting. Almost at the same time, the British government also issued a similar statement, condemning the German army's destruction of cultural relics. As a neutral country, the United States also commented on this, believing that the behavior of the German army was inappropriate. Of course, they are neutral countries, and in order to avoid offending Germany, they cannot make too radical remarks. Chapter 525, Emperor's Support. The so-called literati and artists are undoubtedly the most self-righteous group of people in the world. They think that art has no borders. War cannot destroy those historical sites and works of art. Actually, no one cares about the opinions of the real power holders. What they think, first of all, is to ensure that they can win this war, which is undoubtedly the most important thing. As for the rest, it doesn't matter at all. However, with the promotion of Britain and France, and the promotion of the United States, the whole world is paying attention to the asterisk of the German army in Paris. That's right. Some artists have regarded the German army's attack on Paris as a barbarian, or even an act of wild beasts. All major newspapers around the world are accusing Qin Tian and the German army who attacked Paris. Countless artists jumped out and condemned Qin Tian's behavior of destroying civilization. Even in Germany, there was a great shock. Hundreds of German artists jointly signed a letter to Kaiser Wilhelm II, requesting that the German army stop the attack on Paris. Some even demanded that Qin Tian be severely punished, and it would be best to remove Qin Tian from the position of Crown Prince. Your Majesty, this is the third protest letter I have received. The artists are very dissatisfied with the behavior of His Royal Highness and the army in Paris. Shall we appease them? At the imperial meeting, Prime Minister Bernhard von Bülow said, in the past 2 days, he was completely overwhelmed by these protests. Pacify them? Why do you want to appease them? His Highness is leading our army to fight battles with the enemy on the front line. These guys, who are enjoying themselves in the back, are now jumping out to criticize His Highness and the army. It is simply too much. Have they forgotten their identities? Falkenhayn, the Minister of War and Chief of the General Staff, said dissatisfiedly, seeing that the Imperial Army is about to capture Paris and defeat France, it has made great achievements. Those guys jumped out. Isn't this deliberately looking for trouble? What's more, artists from other countries are making noise, and they are also making noise. Have they forgotten that they are Germans? Yes, Your Majesty. For the current empire, it is undoubtedly the most important thing to find a way to win the current war. For the empire, Paris is an important city that has to be captured. After defeating Paris, the French, I'm afraid that the will to fight will be disintegrated, even if they still want to continue fighting. However, their will to resist should not be too firm. What's more, if the French lose hundreds of thousands of troops in Paris, there is simply not much strength to continue the fight. Therefore, not only can we not stop the attack on Paris, but we must support His Royal Highness and their actions. Marshal Earl Tirpitz, Minister of the Navy, also said, obviously, the attitude of the Imperial Army soldiers is clear. In times of war, defeating the enemy country is the most important thing. As for other culture and arts, they all have to stand aside. King William II nodded. Of course he knew the importance clearly. In his opinion, the behavior of those artists are completely out of nothing. It was Paris that was ruined, and had nothing to do with them. The French and the British were quarreling, and that was justifiable. But if they make a fuss, it's too inappropriate. This is because they don't regard themselves as Germans at all. Gentlemen, of course, Paris is a very beautiful city, a city of culture. However, for the empire to win this war, even if Paris is destroyed, it is not at all. Our troops in Paris, what you did was completely justified, and should be done. All of this is a conspiracy of the British and the French. William II expressed his attitude. Obviously, William II hopes to win this war more than Paris, a famous cultural city. As for Paris, if it is ruined, and it is no big deal at all. Your Majesty is wise. Marshal Earl Tirpitz and Marshal von Falkenhayn said immediately. Your Majesty, how are we going to deal with those artists? If we let them go on like this, I'm afraid it's not a solution. They publish articles in newspapers every day, criticizing His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and the Imperial Government. This will damage the reputation of the Crown Prince, and the Imperial Government will undoubtedly have a very adverse impact. Prime Minister Bernhard von Bülow said. William II couldn't help but frowned. If Qin Tian's reputation is damaged, it will have a very negative impact on his succession to the German Emperor in the future. We have to find a way to stop these guys. William II said. Do you have any ideas? William II asked. Your Majesty, we may be able to divide and attack a group of people. I believe that among those artists, a large number of them are artists with real integrity. However, there are definitely some people who were bought by the French or the British. We can attack them and then expose them to the entire nation. In this way, those artists will naturally have no face to continue making trouble. Marshal von Falkenhayn suggested. King William II nodded. This is a good idea. The Ministry of War will be responsible for this matter. Yes, Your Majesty. Marshal von Falkenhayn nodded. Marshal von Falkenhayn knew that it was too easy to deal with those artists. Don't look at how violent they are, but in front of the state apparatus, especially in front of violent institutions like the army, they are simply vulnerable. He has too many ways to deal with them. Even if they are not bought by the French and the British, as long as they are planted In front of the state apparatus, they have no chance to justify themselves. Your Majesty, what about international public opinion? In addition to the two hostile countries, Britain and France, other neutral countries such as the United States also have a lot of remarks that are not conducive to the empire. Foreign Minister von Kidron-Wacht has said, "It goes without saying that Britain and France, all of this is their conspiracy. As for other countries, if they want to make trouble, let them go. This will not have any impact on the strength of the German Empire. Once the empire won this world war and became the hegemon of the world, if they still dare to do this, don't blame the empire for being rude." William II said domineeringly. "Yes, Your Majesty," von Kidron-Wacht said. "Indeed, if Germany wins the final victory of the war and becomes the world hegemon, can other countries still target Germany in this way? Even if they themselves, I'm afraid they don't want to anger Germany because of this." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.